Perfect. Great. Okay, good. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. It is September too, so it feels particularly sing-songy teacher-like. Good morning. I will call our meeting to order for our District of Tofino regular council meeting for Tuesday, the 8th of September, and it is 10 a.m. We'll start by recognizing that we are conducting our business today in Tla-o-qui-aht territory, and also note that our meeting is being recorded and it's will be posted on the district's YouTube channel. And let's get into it. So first of all, a motion to adopt the agenda, please. Adoption. Thank you. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. Motion carried. And some minutes from the regular council meeting that was held on August 25th for adoption.
Adoption. Second.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Any errors or omissions noted in the minutes? Seeing none, all in favor? Thank you. None opposed. Motion carried. All right. Anybody sign up for public comment? No. Elise is nodding or shaking her head. No mayor report today. No delegations today. So first of all, we have a letter from the BC Restaurant and Food Service Association regarding a request for municipality support for expanded patio permissions and a number of other recommendations that they have brought forward. And so maybe first of all, are there any questions from members of council about this letter or any comments? Councillor, like, Councillor Steer, making eye contact. Yeah. Go ahead, Councillor Steer.
It was a question in terms of, and it was a clarification for me, was around with those extensions, there wasn't an increase in seating capacity. It was just an increase of space capacity, basically, for those areas. That is correct. Yeah. Okay. That's.
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor McQuaid.
Yeah. Thank you. I did actually have an opportunity to speak to a couple of people about this letter. And I think that the intuition of the letter that having the district speak to their intent to keep patios available is very valuable for those restaurants who haven't taken advantage of it this season. To be able to plan for that availability next season will be important. So however council chooses to signal or address that, I think is key. Also, the other recommendation was creating a program for designated pickup zones so businesses can enhance contactless curbside pickup. We have heard from the Tofino Long Beach Chamber of Commerce and their restaurant roundtable that having assistance in designating parking or pickup zones outside businesses for 5-minute or 10-minute pickup zones would be really helpful. So however council can facilitate that or encourage that, I think would be even would be excellent. Yeah. So I just wanted to encourage both of those. The temporary patios, encouraging temporary patios for summer 2021, and the contactless curbside pickup and allowing for parking for that, I think would both be very beneficial.
Thank you. Any comments from this side of the room?
I, in general, support it and agree with Councillor McQuaid. I'm curious what the plan is to keep our pop-up dining areas open or not. We were going to close them at any particular time.
Let's ask.
Bring them back next year, or
okay.
We're going to start winding them down in the next week or so. That's the plan at this point. For next year, unknown at this time. We'll see kind of where things are. We want to do a bit of a kind of a post-season review of how it went, talking with the folks that were hosting there and others. My sense is that it was appreciated by many. We have had other feedback though that through the mayor's task force that it may not have been as well received by some. So we'll have a look at it for next year.
okay.
Councillor Law.
My question was answered.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Stewart.
I had just questions in terms of what that feedback that we'll be getting later on in terms of things like parking issues. I know in some of the areas where the extended out into those parking areas with probably the anticipation that we wouldn't have had the numbers that we had this summer. If when we do look at that review that specifically those types of issues might be looked at, in context to allowing that space to continue out into those parking areas and also with the parking here. Just, I'm sure it would be. I just wanted to bring that up.
Thanks. Okay.
I did actually have a question. It does say that the Restaurant Association will be working with the LCLB to also extend licensing for the patios, which currently ends on October 31st. I have heard from restaurant operators taking advantage of that having those patios be licensed is really important. Is there any way that we can encourage or advocate for that? Or would that be something that the Chamber of Commerce would be better suited?
I think we probably both could. Yeah, in the form of writing a letter, for example. Yeah. So I'm hearing general support about acting on the recommendations that are coming through this letter. And maybe one thing we could do is then refer the letter to staff and ask our staff to come back with whatever needs to be done too.
Yeah, certainly we can. And I mean, this is part of kind of a sort of a larger post-season review with other issues that the council has talked about and is aware of. Just in quick response to Councillor Steer's question comment, we didn't feel particularly challenged as we have other years for parking downtown. It seemed, and we did do some parking surveys this past weekend, but it seemed to me as someone who's downtown a lot that it was much easier to find parking than the previous 5 summers. And in fact, our parking out back, weekdays during peak periods was, I think one day I looked out and it was full. So that's very, very unusual. Where other years it's full by 11 a.m. Everyone's going to the beaches.
So perhaps we could have then a motion that the letter be referred to staff to report back to council with options to extend patio permissions into summer 2021 and consider a designated pickup zone, designated parking pickup zone program, whatever it's called.
I'll second that.
That's okay. Elise, do you want me to say that again?
No,
Yeah.
I think that's
Okay.
just fine. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Any final discussion on this then? All right, all in favor? Thank you. Motion is carried. All right, so we'll go into our first presentation, and that is Nyla, and here she is around permissive tax exemptions. Thanks, Nyla.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. I'm here to address the report regarding permissive tax exemptions for taxation years 2021 to 2024. I'll provide a brief overview of what I'll cover today. So I'll provide a brief summary of the applications that we received. I'll go over a couple outstanding issues that we will have to address before the bylaw is brought forward to council. I'll talk about how midterm applications will occur, and by midterm applications, I mean applications that we'll receive after the 4-year term bylaw is adopted. I'll talk about the financial impacts and then the next steps after today. So in total, we received 10 applications. They were due on August 14th of this year. So if council recalls, the policy was reviewed and amended earlier this year, and that allowed some flexibility for application due dates between July 15th and August 15th of the year that they will be required and due. We received 10 applications in total, and 2 applications are not being recommended for exemptions in this council report, and I'll go over those 2 in a moment. Exemptions, I just wanted to remind council, are at the sole discretion of council, and they must align with the permissive tax exemption policy, which has been developed in consideration of what is allowable under Section 224 of the Community Charter. Application requirements include a completed application by the due date, applicant and, if applicable, lessee financial statements, and any current lease agreements should a portion of the property or the parcel that is applying for an exemption be under a lease agreement. So one of the parcels that will be included in the permissive tax exemption bylaw and is leased by the District of Tofino does not require a permissive tax exemption application. Council's policy addresses any properties that may be under a stat right-of-way or an agreement with the District of Tofino and another applicant property. This one is the TELUS Communications property at the corner of 2nd and Neil Street, where we have the parking area. So that will receive 100% exemption. The Anglican Church and the Catholic Church applied for an exemption for the property and any accessory buildings that surround the places of worship. Those places of worship are exempted under a statutory exemption. That's a different section of the community charter, but an application must be received to exempt the remainder of the property. The Tla-o-qui-aht Sound Community Theatre, that is under a lease agreement in the Municipal Hall, applied for an exemption. Tofino Senior Citizens Housing Society applied for an exemption. This is the parcels located at 270 and 290 First Street. This application came in as a midterm application under the previous exemption term, which ends for the 2020 taxation year. So this is an application for affordable housing for low to moderate income for seniors housing 55 and older. Tofino Bible Fellowship is a new application, and this is application for affordable housing at 1129 Abraham. The estimated or the assessment value for 2020 for this parcel is $472,700. Tofino Salmon Enhancement Society is an application we see every term, and that's for the parcel located where the hatchery is at the end of Sharp Road. Tofino Destination Management Association, which was incorrectly listed as organization instead of association on the assessment roll and in our permissive tax exemption bylaw. So we are adjusting that for this term, and that's for the visitor center located on the highway. So I'll just go over the 2 outstanding issues and the applications that are not included in today's recommendation by staff. One application that we typically see is from the Royal Canadian Legion. The application that we received was an incomplete application. It didn't include important financial statements that we require to review the application, to look at things such as ensuring that the organization has other revenue sources, which is required in council's policy, what the expenditures are looking like, and whether the organization has an ability to pay taxation or not, which may be part of council's consideration, particularly if we are reaching that exemption limit. We didn't receive any up-to-date lease agreements for the parcels or the financial statements associated with those lease agreements. So one outstanding issue that I'm working with BC Assessment on is a portion of the building that is leased by the Vancouver Island Regional Library. So that portion of the property should receive a statutory exemption under 220 of the community charter. So once I receive an up-to-date lease agreement, either from the library or the Legion, I'll be able to submit that to BC Assessment, and that will be considered a statutory exemption, as long as the library is a lessee of that parcel of the property. All other portions of the property will be taxable for 2021 if they're not included in the permissive tax exemption bylaw. I am working with the staff person that I've been in contact with there and have stated that an application can come in 2021 for consideration for 2022 taxation year. The other application was from the Tofino Housing Corporation for the portion of DL 114 that is under subdivision and will be transferred to the Tofino Housing Corporation. So this was a fairly complex application for a few reasons. One is that this property is still in the name of the District of Tofino, and because of that, it receives a statutory exemption as district-owned property. The lots, there are 5 lots in total that will be subdivided from a portion of that land and then transferred to the Housing Corporation. And when looking at an exemption request, we have to look at what the use of those properties will be. And I wasn't able to receive clear information on what each of those 5 lots will be used for. For example, some may be used for market housing, some will be used for affordable housing. But without having that information clear at this point in time, I can't safely recommend to council an exemption for 2 out of 5 of the lots or 3 out of 5 of the lots and pinpoint which ones exactly that would be used for affordable housing in order to comply with the permissive tax exemption request and the legislation and the policy that council has in place. So I am working with the Housing Corporation to encourage an application in 2021 for the 2022 taxation year, and then making sure that I receive that information as things progress in that regard. So as we receive midterm applications, staff will inform council of any impact that will have on the total exemption limit. So we look at that exemption limit on an annual basis and we determine whether that exemption limit will be reached for the following taxation year. We use the current budget, the current assessment values, and the current tax rates to determine what that will look like for the following year, because that's the information we have available at that time. If we feel like that exemption limit will be surpassed and exemption applications come in midterm, then we're able to come to council and say, this is what it would look like. This is how it will impact all other exemptions that have been approved for the 4-year term. And we can have a discussion on whether council would like to amend that bylaw or not. So applications midterm have to be received by August 15th. And I will continue to work with these 2 outstanding applicants to bring in applications in the 2021 taxation year for 2022 taxation.
Do you want specific questions now, or do you want to?
I'm happy to answer questions as we go along, because those were,
Thanks. Any questions yet? I need to understand the housing corporation one better.
Sure.
So I understand that it's complex, but I don't understand why it couldn't go forward now and then those lots that become, if some lots do become used for market housing, for example, that they would then be taxed, be subject to property tax. What is the risk?
So the difficulty is that we have to establish which portion of those properties and identify them in the permissive tax exemption bylaw for them to be exempt in the following year. And we have to have that information available to us before we adopt that bylaw, which is looking like October 27th council meeting. So if they're included in the exemption bylaw, then they will be exempt in the following year. There's no means for us to amend that information and submit it to BC assessment to change that. So it becomes a transfer of information. You know, I guess I don't have the information right now to very clearly indicate to BC assessment what should be exempt and what shouldn't be exempt.
So we know that lots 1 and 2 where the apartment buildings will be affordable housing.
I have asked for that information from the Housing Corporation Executive Director, and I wasn't able to clearly indicate which lots would be for market housing and which ones would not be. So I'm a little confused. Lots 1 and 2 are clearly for affordable housing, and we're in the middle of a housing agreement discussion and the rezoning is going through. What do you need do you need like a letter, or you need Well, the information that I received from the Housing Corporation representative and our planning department is that there wasn't a clear indication on which lots would be used for market housing and which lots would be used for affordable housing. So I use that information to prepare this information for council today.
Okay. It feels to me like there's a need for more conversation there.
Okay.
Okay.
I concur.
Okay. Here's my thing. I do not want to take a risk that if the land is transferred to the Housing Corporation in 2020, like soon, and then it ends up being, they're subject to paying property tax because we haven't put them in this exemption, that then we're just passing on more costs to the eventual people who are going to live in the housing. It just adds to the cost of the project. So it sounds to me more like a communication thing, maybe than a.
Okay. I'm not sure what more to say on that. I tried to receive very clear information before presenting to council today, and up to last Friday, I wasn't able to get a clear indication on what was going to be used for market housing and what was going to be used for affordable housing.
Okay.
Had I received that information, we could work with that.
Okay.
We could exempt some of those lots and not other lots.
Yeah, which I think we can.
Can I ask a question? Sure. Is it that all 5 lots, you have to know for all 5, or like it's not enough to know that just that 2 of them are going to be, but that the other 3 that are in motion, like it's not, is that where
that would be enough information to exempt lot 1 and 2 for sure.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
For these 2 that are not being recommended to go forward, is there still time for them to complete that information before we go to considering the bylaw?
Well, we do have a deadline in place for a reason, to allow staff the administrative time it takes to bring this information first to council and then go away and prepare the bylaw to bring back to council for consideration. So I would say that time has run out for the information. We were a bit flexible with the time where we needed to be, but I'd say that there isn't enough time to work with further applicants at this time.
Okay.
Okay. So this is the estimated financial impact over the next 4 years, and this information is subject to change and it's estimates only. We've based this on 2020 tax rates and 2020 assessment values, which we know will change in the 2021 taxation year. So the estimate for 2021 at this time is $44,634. And the exemption limit for the 2021 taxation year is $73,587. So we're not close to reaching that exemption limit. I don't have any concerns, even if the other two applications, if they were to come online, say in 2021, or we include them in 2022, I don't see a risk there for reaching that exemption limit over the next 4 years. If there are other applicants that come on stream that I'm not aware of yet, that may impact the exemption limit, and that will be brought back to council for discussion. So this includes a 5% increase per year, and the reason why we've gone with a 5% increase is that that's an estimate for all taxing authorities, not for just municipal taxes. So the next steps will be if we receive authorization to prepare the permissive tax exemption bylaw with the recommendation in today's report or as amended, we will introduce a bylaw at the October 13th meeting. We will post public notice of the proposed bylaw, which is required, and adoption would come forward to the October 27th meeting. We are required to adopt the bylaw by October 31st, and we will submit that bylaw to BC Assessment after that time and notify all applicants of the results of the application in writing. As I mentioned before, midterm applications, if any, will be brought forward to council each year by August 15th for consideration. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm still, whoops, sorry about that. I still don't, I just don't have a lot of comfort around the Tofino Housing Corporation piece, and I want to give the Housing Corporation a benefit of the doubt to be able to do what's in the best interest of the eventual project, which I think we're all in agreement about. But I just don't understand why it can't, why it couldn't be included now, and then those pieces of property that do become market housing, say in 3 years or something, like the duplex lots, they would then become eligible to be have their property taxes assessed and paid.
For the tax, okay, I'm not sure I understand the confusion or the question, but let me provide some information that may help.
All right, thanks.
Okay. So there is a subdivision underway under the name of the District of Tofino.
Mm-hmm.
So first of all, depending on when that transfer will occur, and I'm unclear on when that transfer will exactly occur, because subdivision needs to be approved and completed, and then the land transfer can occur, and that takes time. So if it remains in the district's name, likely until the next calendar year, it's not going to be taxable in 2021. So I'm unsure on what that timeline looks like. If we were to assume that the timeline looks like how the Housing Corporation is hoping for, which is transfer of the land this year, whether it's all 5 parcels or not, I'm not sure, that will impact next year's assessment roll. So I'm trying to get clear information from the Housing Corporation or from the Planning Department, mostly the Housing Corporation, because I need to know what the intentions are for the use of those 5 parcels, so I can appropriately recommend to council what can or cannot be exempt. Land that's being transferred with the intention to be used for market housing cannot be exempt. It's not allowable under the community charter, and I would not advise council to exempt property that will be used for market housing. We just don't exempt any other properties used for market housing. those parcels that will be used for affordable housing can be exempt. And if we can indicate which of those lots will be used for affordable housing, then we can certainly include those lots in the exemption bylaw, which is what I tried to achieve prior to bringing this to council up till last Friday. So if we can get that information and clarify which lots we can include in that permissive tax exemption bylaw, I can certainly include that. The application is in order, it's in place, and it's been reviewed and it's ready to go. But I could not confidently come to council and say which lots out of the 5 could be exempt based on the charter and based on council's policy.
So if council wanted to give, permit the time, and I understand why there's an application deadline, and I understand how much work this is for you and your team to be able to pull it together too. Do you have suggestions for us as to how to handle that, or how to handle this at this point?
Yes, I mean, I've done all the work that's required to review the application. So if I get a clarification from the Housing Corporation today, tomorrow, or soon, so I can work on preparing that bylaw, then there's no reason why those lots cannot be included in that bylaw.
Okay.
In which case, council can amend the resolution to include the lots to be used for affordable housing on DL 114 for Tofino Housing Corporation, be exempt and included in that bylaw for consideration.
And do that today?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Thanks. That's a good path forward.
Okay.
Great, I like it. Councilor McQuaid.
Sorry, just in the interest of fairness, do we also extend that ability to the Legion application?
Well, there are 2 very different situations here. With the Legion, we have tried to work with the applicant beyond the deadline to receive complete information, and we haven't received very crucial information, mostly with respect to financial statements for all the lessees as well as the current lease agreements.
Okay.
So while I am able to work with a portion of the property under a statutory exemption, there's no deadline for that of October 31st. I can work with BC assessment, and it's just outside of this process.
Yeah. Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
In the report, there was an appendix that I couldn't find for the actual tax exemption policy, which I wanted to review. I don't know if it was mine specifically, but I wasn't able to find that policy. And I do vaguely remember it. And one of the things that I do remember was that services which council considers are directly related to the purposes of the municipality, and kind of reviewing some of those applications. I just wanted to, if council have that discussion, if we haven't had before, just to maybe review that policy and to, specifically for my benefit, because I know we've had the discussion before, and I just want to be clear on what the benefits to Tofino Destination Management Association would be to the district, and those services that we would exempt those taxations for. So that was something that had come up in my review, and not being able to find that a great finder of things, obviously, to have that review process there. And I don't know if this is the time or place for that. I suspect it is. Just for my clarity as to what council might feel as, and we don't have to go over all of them. I had one specific. Does that make sense?
I think so.
I mean, I could clarify it in the sense that I have questions around the Tofino Destination Management Association related to the information that I could find, and in terms of the services which council considers are directly related to the purposes of the municipality.
Yeah, so yes, and the policy.
And I'm open to the discussion, so yeah.
Understood. So, and I think this is pretty normal at a time of considering the permissive tax exemptions, that we look at the policy and council can amend the policy at any time that it wishes to do so. This is the policy we had work going into it.
Yeah. It
is online, but you're right, you would have to dig it out, and it just wasn't appended to the report, so it wasn't as easy to find. So I don't, today having a conversation about amending the policy I don't know that that's something that we can really accommodate in that
I'm not asking for
Okay.
an amendment to the policy, maybe a discussion on maybe my understanding of what's in there, and the one piece that I was able to glean, to maybe have that conversation. I mean, I don't know if we ever review in terms of you made clear the applications and everything, and I was able to review those. But, do we often have the conversation about those that are applying for those exemptions? And council, the last time I went through this, we just basically give the check mark without discussion about those organizations.
Right, okay. So, yeah, because we develop a policy for that specific reason. So the policy defines the sort of principles that we're applying, and then people will apply based on that policy. And we did a policy amendment so that an organization like Tourism Tofino could apply for, and had an extensive conversation at that time. And so I think Nyla and staff have gone forward and, asked the community for applications and received these applications. So.
Yeah, I can comment on that a little bit. So I like to bring the policy forward before the new applications are received for the next term. So every 4 years, on about a 4-year review. So I brought it forward in the spring, and that was during that discussion, we talked about the categories, the evaluation categories that are included in the policy. And one of them is the Tofino Destination Management Association. It's a very specific definition. Yes, it is. And that would be the organization that through the district would receive the MRDT funds. So that's an opportunity to discuss which evaluation categories to include or not to include, or have a look at what types of properties may come forward through the application process if we were to keep that evaluation category in the policy or not. But I should note to council that just because those categories are included in the bylaw and the application requirements are met and they qualify for an exemption under the legislation, it's still at the discretion of council. They don't need to be approved just because they meet the requirements.
Thank you. That's kind of where I was going.
Okay.
Yeah.
And my apologies, I did have a typo in the report. I did indicate the policy was attached and I did not attach it. So I will forward it to you for information after.
Councilor Law?
Yeah, no, thanks. I just have a question about the Tofino Destination Management Association overall, and maybe you can help me out here. So they are funded by MRDT. Is that completely? So if they were taxed, they would be taxed out of the MRDT funds. That's how they get their money, right?
Not 100%. They do have other sources of revenue. And so if they were taxed, it would become a line item in their statements, and they would use their revenue sources to determine how they would pay for the taxes.
Yeah, so I mean, I was just thinking, since it is a fairly, MRDT funds are kind of restricted in their use. It seemed to me that it could be a way of, we don't exempt them, but perhaps increase the MRDT funds to cover it, and it would be a way of, the town recouping some of the MRDT funds to use what we want here. It was just an idea. It was, it's, do you know what I mean?
I know what you're saying there. So basically, if the organization was taxed, then they would have to pay the taxes. Whether it would come from our MRDT or not, I don't know. We wouldn't increase MRDT. The MRDT is set and established based on what's collected, the tax that's collected, and then what we receive is transferred over. Today's discussion has to be about whether the organization should be taxed or not based on council's policy that's in place. And that would be having a look at how the land's being used and whether it is considered by council an extension of a municipal service.
Yeah, thanks. And when we had quite an extensive discussion about this when the policy was amended, it was in part because the Chamber of Commerce used to operate the visitor center on that site, providing visitor services to people coming, and it was deemed that was deemed an acceptable use, and there was no property tax paid. And that when Tourism Tofino then took over and began operating the visitor center, the question came up, well, now that it's a different entity, should it be paying tax? And the council's decision at the time, I think, rested very much on the sort of principle of this is what it's being used for. It doesn't matter which organization is doing it. Just because one organization has a different source of revenue than another didn't mean suddenly that we were going to tax them. So that's how that decision was made at the time. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, so let me see if I've got this correct. So coming back to the recommendation, we could add the housing corporation for those lots that are indicated to be
Use for affordable
used
housing.
for affordable housing. And that would be a way to enable you to begin to prepare the bylaw to come back to us. That okay. All right. Would somebody care to make the recommendation, the motion? Councillor Anderson.
Do we need to have a motion to deal with that District Law 114 affordable housing lots first?
No,
Or,
I don't think so.
Or the
Yeah.
recommendation as it stands is what could be
Yeah.
moved at this.
And then add the Tofino Housing Corporation for those lots that are.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
And then I'll move.
Okay.
Staff be authorized to prepare a tax exemption bylaw for taxation years 2021 to 2024 that includes the properties associated with the following applications as attached to Appendix 1 to the staff report 2021 to 2024 permissive tax exemption applications dated September 8th, 2020. TELUS Communications, Anglican Synod Diocese of BC, Clackwood Sound Community Theatre, Bishop of Victoria, St. Francis of Assisi Catholic Church, Tofino Senior Citizens Housing Society, Tofino Bible Fellowship, Tofino Salmon Enhancement Society, Tofino Destination Management Association, and Tofino Housing Corporation.
Okay, thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Any questions? All right, all in favor? Thank you. Motion carried. All right, thanks, Nala.
You're welcome.
Just one
Yeah.
last question. Could the Legion reapply next year, or do they have to wait to the 4-year cycle?
No, they can apply next
Okay.
year.
Nice and clean for Peter. Thank you. Okay, so our next item is the housing agreement bylaw for the housing corporation at the District Law 114. Peter, hello.
Morning, Mayor and Council. Get my hands real quick. All right, so our first presentation from me this morning, at least, is regarding the Tofino Housing Corporation. This is a redo of the housing agreement bylaw that was originally considered a couple meetings ago, I believe. So this is a consideration of first, second, third readings of the housing agreement bylaw. So the zoning amendment was recently adopted. That's Bylaw 1279/2020. This housing bylaw is associated with the zoning amendment, though as discussed, staff are recommending that we hold off adoption of the housing bylaw until the proposed subdivision is complete so that we could actually register the agreement to the appropriate lots, as this particular agreement is not going to cover all 5 of the new lots that have been created through or that will be created through the subdivision that's been allowed by the zoning amendment. So the intent of this housing bylaw is to regulate who may rent the units in the development, maximum rental fees payable. There's also a provision for kind of the selection process for who may be, even if there's a number of eligible people to rent the units, the selection process for picking who of those eligible people may rent them. So most of the proposed development, the 2 lots of the 5 lots that are going to be subdivided, these apartment blocks that are proposed, will be intended to provide affordable, attainable housing for residents of Tofino. Current information regarding affordable housing is based on our affordable housing needs assessment from 2015. permanent year-round rental accommodation, as we regularly discuss, is a housing category of great need from 2015 and currently as well. And that's the main thrust of this particular development, is to address that challenge. According to the Affordable Housing Needs Assessment, these are kind of the adjusted rental fees. Single occupancy should be as low as 670. And then for medium income households and higher income households, it goes up into about 1,200 up to about 1,600. The Affordable Housing Needs Assessment kind of indicated that the median Tofino salary is about $24,000 and the average is about 31,000. However, it's important to note that that's just kind of individual salaries. The 2016 census notes that the median total household income was just under 73,000. So this particular development kind of considers both the provisions of the Affordable Housing Needs Assessment, as well as some of the information that's been garnered from the 2016 census. And it kind of has this housing agreement is kind of based on those two particular things, and it's intended to provide a bit of a wider range of income levels that it accommodates, as well as a wider range of housing opportunities. Rental rates are basically proposed to occupy the range that's been listed in this table. So there's the lower range that'd be about as low as it could possibly go, based on a significant amount of subsidization achievable of various grants and full occupancy, also possibly towards the later end of the mortgage. Then the higher end is basically the maximum that would be permitted under this particular housing agreement. As mentioned, the home sizes, household income levels kind of cover a larger range of that's considered under the Affordable Housing Needs Assessment, but they are generally in line with the Affordable Housing Needs Assessment goals. So one of the questions from council at the last time this came before council was to look for a bit more information about what would trigger, the various stages of the range in terms of how rent would actually be considered and assessed and charged. My understanding from talking to the representative of the applicant, Ian Scott, is that it really kind of depends on the various funding that's achieved for this particular project. It's also a little bit difficult to kind of put limits and breaking points on, like, okay, so this much of the mortgage has been paid off, there's this much of an occupancy, we've achieved this amount of funding, so now the rents get lowered $200. It's quite difficult to do that because it's very challenging to anticipate where the funding's going to come from. So that's kind of the limit of my understanding on it, and so it's quite difficult to kind of predict exactly where that range is going to be. However, the Tofino Housing Corporation, which is essentially the proponent of this particular development, is very much under control of the District of Tofino, and they've partnered with Catalyst, which is a nonprofit developer. So the general kind of impetus behind this project is provide affordable housing and not necessarily to make a particular profit or to pull a lot of money out of this particular project. This is, again, my understanding from talking with Mr. Scott. Although we don't have particular control over exactly how the sliding scale will be applied to each individual applicant, it is kind of geared towards providing as low rental as possible from, kind of the way we've set the project up all the way through to the structure of the organizations that are involved. So agreement highlights, essentially the agreement reads very similar to the way that it was when it was last presented at council. One of the things that has been amended would be to include allowances for essential workers as qualified tenants. And so this would allow essential workers such as frontline workers or people who are working on critical infrastructure here within the District of Tofino to forego particular requirements of other qualified tenants, such as living in the regional district of Alberni-Tla-o-qui-aht for 24 of the last 36 months. However, there are certain things that are still required, such as not owning any property anywhere else in the world and a few of the other things. So it just allows a little bit more leeway for essential workers to be considered as qualified tenants. So the bylaw that we're considering is essentially giving the district the authority to enter into the housing agreement that's been attached to the bylaw. The responsibility for this housing agreement will be passed to Catalyst as the operators of the units via the THC lease agreement. So the options, again, here on the table are to grant first, second, and third readings to the bylaw, grant first, second, and third readings as further amended, reject or refuse the application, defer or otherwise deal with the application. And again, we anticipate that adoption will be held off until the subdivision process has been completed and we actually have individual lots that we can apply this housing agreement to. So next steps in development, finalize the subdivision, and then we will be adopting the housing bylaw. So any questions or comments, I'm happy to try and speak to them.
Thank you. Okay. Any questions or comments? I just have one myself. I think in the definitions, under the definition of essential worker, it speaks to a care aide in the education system, but I actually think the correct term would be education assistant.
Okay.
So that's something maybe we can, do we need to amend today, or can it be?
Within the actual bylaw itself,
Yeah.
We've kind of added a bit of a qualification so that if there's anything, such as grammar or tiny things that can be changed, that can be changed after adoption, as long as it doesn't change the substance of the agreement.
Yeah, okay, so I don't think it changes the intention or substance at all. It's just the incorrect term. Care aide is more for the healthcare system, and education assistant is the term used in the education system. Okay. Anyone have any questions? Okay.
I'll move that we grant first, second and third readings of District of Tofino Housing Agreement Bylaw number 1289 2020.
Second.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Great. Final chance for any comment or questions? Okay. All in favor? Thank you. Motion is carried. All right. And you're still here.
Yeah, we've got a couple more to go.
Next, yes.
So the next presentation has to do with the parkland dedication for the same property. This has to do with the ongoing subdivision process that's been initiated since the adoption of the zoning amendment bylaw. Parkland dedication is a requirement of any subdivision that creates more than 2 new lots. So as we're creating 5 new lots here, parkland dedication is actually a requirement. It can be requested up to 5% of the overall area of the parcel that's being considered for subdivision. Council has already, at second reading of the zoning amendment, kind of directed staff to look at a potentially more comprehensive conservation plan for the rest of the lot. With those kind of things in mind, staff have kind of, in working with the applicant, decided that it may be most appropriate for council to request essentially 0% of the subdivision to be parkland dedicated. That would essentially be waiving that requirement. However, it's only waived in light of the fact that we will be coming back with a more comprehensive plan for sort of parkland and conservation of the rest of the property. So again, this is the location. The actual development is just coming off of Layton and Peterson, but there's a tremendous amount of the property that is currently, undeveloped by humans, I should say, except for a few trails and things like that. And so there's lots of opportunity to considerably protect major areas in there, as well as come up with a little bit more of an effective overall plan for the property. So again, due to council's direction, acquiring parkland at this point may not be necessary or advantageous, as we will be considering other parkland options in a more comprehensive manner. So council may by resolution request that parkland be provided as 0% of the parcel area, which is essentially waiving this requirement. Under the circumstances, based on council's direction, the resolution that was given, I believe, second reading of the zoning amendment bylaw, it seems reasonable to waive this parkland requirement. It's also, given the circumstances of this particular development, it will help expedite the development process, which is another bonus to the situation as well. So options would be to have a council resolution that follows the staff recommendation, an alternative resolution, reject or refuse the proposal, or otherwise deal with the parkland dedication requirements. So staff are recommending the first option based on the things that have been outlined in the staff report.
Thanks, Peter.
Any questions?
Any questions? Yes, Councillor Steer.
Thank you, Peter. I understood the review outs of the adjacent parts of DL 114. It was also my understanding that that would apply to other district lands as well. Maybe I was wrong in that, but that being said, I'm not clear on what the disadvantage of dealing with the parkland issue for this specific subdivision outside of the context of the rest of the lot. That I would like to have a discussion around the dedication of it's up to 5%. Why wouldn't we? And you clearly articulated that because we're going to develop a comprehensive plan for the rest of the property. But I'm thinking specifically about this property. What would be the disadvantage of not dealing with it specifically in the parkland dedication? I understand the expediting of the process. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
But there might be more.
I would say that there isn't a specific disadvantage maybe in terms of protecting area, but there is a bit of a disadvantage to the actual development in terms of that was not something that's been currently considered in the existing configuration of the lots in the site plan. So it may require that because this is a district-driven process and it's actually a district lot, we would actually engage another portion of the area to be subdivided essentially, and that would then become the parkland. My understanding, this is again from conversations with the applicant, is that it would almost make a little bit more sense if we kind of approached it from a more comprehensive angle and kind of included within the consideration of I guess, conservation for the entire property, things within the actual development at that point. However, I suppose, to your point, there isn't a tremendous disadvantage outside of the potential slowing down of the subdivision process at this point. Again, it's, as all these things, it does depend on your perspective to a certain extent. There's nothing that would be tremendously disadvantageous, to the district itself. However, as a district-driven process that's looking to accommodate more affordable housing in the area with a comprehensive plan that's kind of based on already previously done work by a registered professional biologist to create that particular plan, it doesn't seem that there would be a tremendous advantage over what we are already planning to do based on council direction.
And did you? Okay.
I mean, go ahead and I maybe just talk a little bit too. Sure.
You may answer my question to follow. I just maybe in terms of the site plan itself, and I wasn't able to ascertain, there may not be room within that subdivision to dedicate up to 5% of a parkland in there. That was one of the thoughts that I may have had, but
yeah, the transaction between the district and the Tofino Housing Corporation has been that the district would transfer kind of the bare minimum of land required to facilitate the proposed development that council has seen through a rezoning application. So if we were to if council did want to dedicate, see parkland dedicated through the subdivision process, the district would have to transfer additional land to the Tofino Housing Corporation so they could dedicate that as parkland. So it would kind of be right bucket to left bucket sort of exercise. I mean, so we'd have to create a different subdivision plan than is proposed right now, which is all feasible. Transfer additional land so that land can be dedicated as park in the name of the District of Tofino by the Tofino Housing Corporation. So it seems like an extra step rather than considering the comprehensive remainder of DL 114 that council has asked staff to do. I think councilor steer that I made it more confusing.
no, actually, I mean, I understood it actually clarified. I mean, what it tells me that maybe previous to that we hadn't considered that in that subdivision as a percentage of whatever it may be within that development itself. So maybe it answered my question about initially that the site didn't incorporate, like we wanted the bare minimum land to subdivide out and we weren't going to put any more in there than was absolutely necessary.
And just to identify my conflict, I'm a board member of the Housing Corporation, but also your staff person.
Here.
And in my role as district staff person, I mean, we've been trying to make sure that we weren't transferring excess lands to the Housing Corporation beyond what this particular development required. And it never made sense to transfer parkland so we can take it back.
Understood.
Any other questions? Okay.
Just
Councilor Wall?
I did have some questions, but they've been answered,
Okay.
I think. I did share some of Councillor Steer's concerns. I just wanted that clarified. But
I understand the process.
Thanks for the clarification.
I think the left pocket to right pocket is a good analogy. And I would also note 5% of what is being transferred is very small. And so I think our goals of setting aside parkland are much better achieved in this other process than they ever would be by 5% of what.
And just understanding the process was,
Yeah.
was part of this, because
Totally.
as it applies to other pieces of land that may be subdivided, and also the idea of a more comprehensive review of what we had talked outside of the L114 when we're looking at those other lands. My only other aspect, and the integrity of the organization is that I would love, we were talking about moving forward with that review about the rest of the DL114 property in terms of those conservation initiatives that we put forward. I'm sure you're working on it as we speak.
Thanks, Councillor Steer. Okay, so
I'll move that the dedication of parkland in association with the subdivision at 351 Arnet Road be set at 0% in light of council direction provided in resolution 198/20 to review district-owned lands outside of the proposed development for environmental protection through zoning covenants or
Second.
thank you. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. Motion carried. Okay, I'm going to hand this over to Acting Mayor McMaster. Declare a conflict of interest on this next item since the applicant is my husband. And if someone could just text me when you're done, I'm going to go outside and upstairs. Thanks.
Yes, so Peter.
All right, so for my third presentation of the morning, we'll be turning our minds to the ongoing zoning amendment application for the Tofino Botanical Gardens. This is at 1084 Pacific Rim Highway. The consideration of first reading. So a little bit of background on the application. It was received on October 31st of 2018. We went through permission to proceed on November 12th of last year. And a portion of the application has been essentially dropped. There's been a little bit of a change that was initiated by the applicant following discussions with district staff. So the location of the property is the Tofino Botanical Gardens bordering the mudflats off of Pacific Rim Highway. So the proposal is essentially a zoning amendment that would allow for an increase in density for staff accommodation units on the subject property. The proposed staff accommodation units would include 5 self-contained cabins up to 200 square meters. That's approximately 2,000 square feet. And 12 sleeping cabins. The sleeping cabins would be somewhere in the range of 400 to 500 square feet each. However, they would not have kitchen and private kitchen and bathroom facilities. It would be kind of a shared kitchen and bathroom facility for those units. The original portion of the application that was related to the eco-lodge, we were looking at clarifying the uses of the eco-lodge and the definition of student. That has been dropped from the application at the request of the applicant. Only additional staff housing is under consideration at this point. So the proposal, this is just a little sketch showing the approximate area for those staff housing units. They'd be just as you enter the property, just to the north, just kind of before you turn around the corner and head towards Darwin's Cafe and up towards the Eco Lodge. So this is something that staff have had a little bit more kind of thought about, particularly with relation to this application. The staff housing, well, we're very much in favor of it in general. In principle, it would also be quite wise to restrict it to a particular area of the property, as the property itself has some important ecological features. And so to just kind of permit that housing to be located anywhere on the property may prove to be problematic in the future. So a quick look at some of the policies that we use to guide our thoughts on these applications. The Vision to Action notes that Tofino has a number of compact and distinct neighborhoods, nodes of commercial and retail services. Diversity of housing forms are available throughout the community. Tofino has become a center of excellence in learning, research and development, value-added industries, sustainable ecotourism. And Tofino's tourism amenities enable visitors to interact with the natural environment with minimal impact. So there's a number of other ones that have been included in the staff report. These are just a few that I picked out that seemed pertinent to what we will be discussing today. The official community plan designates the property as Mackenzie Rural. So this designation is intended to complement nearby tourism commercial development on Mackenzie Beach. However, it's also intended to buffer the Mackenzie neighborhood from Industrial Way. So it's intended to be a fairly rural area. There is a particular density goal within the OCP of about 1 unit per half acre for residential development. There's broad support for staff accommodation throughout the OCP. So in general, there does seem to be significant support for this particular development within the OCP. It's also worth noting that often density goals within the OCP are associated with subdivisions and the creation of new fee simple lots. This zoning amendment won't create any new fee simple lots. It's simply designed to create more units on the existing lot for the purposes of staff accommodation. So mixed use development also is also supported, which will kind of fall into line with a lot of the activities that are happening on the property already. One other thing that's worth noting is that there's a riparian development permit area on the subject property. It's quite near where the applicant is proposing to locate the housing. In discussions with the applicant, they've noted that they intend to keep the housing, any housing that's constructed well out of that riparian DPA. So the goal of the development is to provide kind of affordable, attainable housing to staff of the Tofino Botanical Gardens and other businesses within Tofino. Current information regarding affordable housing, as we've discussed earlier in this meeting, is based on the 2015 Affordable Housing Needs Assessment. And again, we're looking at permanent year-round rental accommodation. So these units being created will be strictly for long-term rental for staff of businesses within the District of Tofino, accomplished in a similar manner to the housing agreement for the THC. However, they will be also considered as staff accommodation, so it may not be quite as restrictive as the housing agreements for the THC. And it's worth noting that a housing agreement has already been discussed with the applicant, and they are willing to enter into one of those should the application proceed. So the property is currently zoned comprehensive commercial institutional district, I believe. The proposed development will require a text amendment to the existing zone. There's also the potential to potentially limit other uses that exist within the zone. That was originally discussed with the applicant, but however, since a portion of the zoning application has been dropped, generally we've kind of focused on the development of the staff housing currently. So this would be what would be added to the existing zone, this little table that would permit 5 of the self-contained dwelling units of 200 square meters and 12 of the independent sleeping units without cooking or washroom facilities associated with them. There'd be 1 shared kitchen facility permitted and shared washroom facilities permitted as required. Some of the land use considerations that staff have been looking at include the form and character of staff accommodations and particularly the siting. As noted before, the goal of this, from speaking with the applicant, is not to create a bunch of houses that are right on the mud flats and kind of overlooking that and can be rented out for a very high price. The goal is to create sort of lower cost staff accommodations. And so to that end, it does seem reasonable to kind of restrict the location of these units to a particular area of the property. Again, that's the applicant's intention. However, should the property be sold or should somebody else come into kind of ownership in the future that is interested in building these and they have not already been built, we may run into some unanticipated or undesired development. Affordable housing, again, this has to do a lot with the housing agreement, which will be something that will come up should the application proceed. This will be something that we will continue to discuss in more depth with the applicant. As noted, they have offered a willingness to engage in a housing agreement to limit the use of the units to staff accommodation, long-term rental, those kinds of things. Traffic, access, servicing, these are always considerations essentially in any rezoning application we receive. Particularly servicing, as there will be a significant addition of units and housing, it will represent a burden on existing infrastructure. So staff are recommending that the applicant provide a servicing brief outlining what the potential build out, how the potential build out will impact existing district infrastructure. Traffic and access, Currently, staff don't have any significant concerns. However, we will be referring this to the Ministry of Transport and Infrastructure as well as to the Director of Public Works. And hopefully they can provide a little bit more direction as to whether they feel that a traffic impact assessment is necessary or additional interventions at the highway would be necessary in order to accommodate this proposed development. Wildlife and environmental considerations, this ties in with the siting of the units. However, there are some environmentally sensitive features on the property, as well as it is, the mudflats are quite a common area for wildlife to pass through. So we will be referring the application to WildSafe BC as well as to the mudflats kind of advisory committee. Hopefully to get a little bit more information around that. And we may be looking at requiring kind of a broad environmental assessment of the property, just so we can understand which areas are more sensitive than others and essentially prohibit the proposed development from existing in those areas. Flooding considerations, there's a couple images associated with the staff report that outline that. Not a major concern on certain portions of the property, but it is something that we're always aware of. And so this may be something that comes up either through zoning or will have to be addressed at a building stage where particular structural enhancements will have to be added, or habitable levels of the building will not be permitted below a certain height, essentially. The multimodal transportation plan is another thing that we always take a quick look at. This particular development does provide some opportunities to allow residents to fit in quite well with the existing multi-use path. It's not too far from the downtown area. It also allows a lot of the people that may live on the property to also work on the same property. So there are some general kind of supports for goals of the multimodal transportation plan within this particular proposed development. As mentioned, it may be worth discussing further the reduction of other zoning provisions. There are certain zoning provisions on the property that are not being used, including some commercial space and some nursery spaces. So that may be something that council would like to consider. This is something that staff will continue discussing with the applicant, and if necessary, we will amend the proposed bylaw at second reading to reflect that. And then, of course, a community amenity contribution. This hasn't been greatly discussed with the applicant, but they're interested in using the housing agreement as potentially a portion or all of this. Again, staff will continue to engage the applicant and hopefully bring something a little bit more concrete back before council prior to, at second reading, pardon me, should the application proceed. So here's a short map just kind of showing the flooding considerations. Again, it doesn't impact too much of the property, and the area of the property that does impact is the riparian development permit area, which the applicant is intended to stay out of. So not a major concern for staff at this point. However, it is something that we will kind of keep in mind as we start to hone in of the siting of these units on the property. And then as far as tsunami concerns, again, there's, based on our most recent maps, there are broad areas of the property that are outside of the tsunami zone. It's also worth noting that Up Industrial Way, which is a fairly close drive or a reasonable walk, is actually a designated tsunami evacuation area. So the options would be to grant first reading to the proposed zoning amendment, grant first reading as amended, reject or refuse the application, or otherwise deal with the application. Staff are currently recommending the first option. So next steps will be referrals, gathering any additional information as required, and then we will bring the bylaw back for second reading should it proceed today. Thanks. If there's any questions, happy to answer.
I'll just start off. I'm a bit confused because you say you're recommending option 1, but when you read the conclusion of your report, you're clearly recommending option 2. Saying in your conclusion says council grant first reading to the proposed zoning amendment bylaw subject to the considerations outlined in this report.
Yeah, so I think at that point, when I was discussing considerations, those are things like requiring a servicing brief, potentially requiring an environmental impact assessment, and at the discretion of MOTI and the Director of Infrastructure and Public Works, potentially requiring a traffic impact assessment. So it's often useful for staff to kind of include that language in our reports, just so that when we go back to the applicant, we can note that council have actually understood that this may be something that staff are asking for and are condoning that asking from staff. And it is also worth noting that there would potentially be amendments at second reading. I think at this point it is reasonable to move forward with first reading. However, there may be some more discussions that need to happen with the applicant to really kind of fine tune, particularly the siting of the units and potentially the limitation of additional uses on the property.
That's as clear as a mud flat. Any questions? Councillor Law?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions just for clarification. The 5 units, self-contained units with a total of 2,100 square feet, that's for all of the units combined?
No, that would be each individual one. So you could have
So 5 2,100.
So 5 new houses.
Square foot houses.
Yeah.
Plus 12 sleeping cabins of 61 square meters each.
Yeah, that's correct. So up to 61 square meters.
That's like a subdivision.
Yeah, no, it's definitely essentially a small, it's a significant development, which is why the servicing brief and these other things that are typically required of larger rezonings would definitely be, in staff's opinion, necessary.
I just also, the property is for sale, and you did note that if we go ahead with this, the next owners, should it sell and nothing is built by the Tofino Botanical Gardens, the next owners will have the ability to build in a way that we have less control over. Is that what you're saying?
Well, that's sort of why I've been mentioning things like the siting and the housing agreements and these other aspects of it that, given the current applicant, may not be a significant concern. However, given that the property is for sale, should this zoning amendment be adopted prior to the sale of the property, the next owner may have a different overall plan for the property and may be able to use this particular amendment in a way that we're not necessarily in favor of. So that's why considering things like siting and having a really quite tight housing agreement would be quite important for this particular rezoning, because it is granting a significant use change to, even though it is just one table on paper.
Councillor Anderson?
Yeah, not a question, but just a couple of comments. Some of our zoning bylaws, we sort of get caught up later in not having really clear definitions. So should we move forward with this, I'd really like to see that the self-contained dwelling unit, sleeping cabins, etc., be clearly defined in the zoning bylaw. So. And also, I was curious to know, this report doesn't include any comment on parking, and I'm wondering if that's a consideration going forward. Also, because there isn't lots sort of defined for these units, I'm wondering how we deal with sort of setbacks between buildings and so on. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Peter, once again. Yeah, in general, I mean, I support the organization taking responsibility for housing employees and but there are obviously some concerns, and we've touched on size, and I would agree with Councillor Anderson. Sometimes we have been tripped up by definitions, so clarity around things such as sleeping units, I think would be important in light of this particular one, where some definitions sometimes were left to consideration. So those are some of those. Definitely the size of those units has me to pause, and I think of those 5 2,100 square foot units. Those are significant in size. I think my own house in the size. So it is creating, as I think was mentioned, almost a small subdivision. So probably, in discussion with the applicant, that certainly those concerns are coming out from council in those discussions, and you make very clear that a servicing brief be absolutely critical for those units. So those are just some of the concerns. I would support, of course, moving forward with the first reading, understanding that that these concerns are going to be brought forward to the applicant. So by second reading, we may see probably some clarifications and maybe some response to the size.
Yeah, my concerns.
Okay.
My concerns have all been expressed. Thanks.
Yeah, I share similar concerns as the rest of council. Probably ultra cautious because of past history and also the fact that we all know the property's for sale. Can you refresh me what the definition of staff housing is?
Staff housing, I'm not sure if we actually have it in the zoning bylaw.
Let me give you an example.
I know it is defined in our DCC bylaw, essentially as staff housing would be for, somebody who is a staff of a particular, business that is on the property. Typically, we refer to staff housing in association with the resorts in town.
But say if I bought some property and it was zoned to allow staff housing and I buy the property and I'm the operator and manager of that property, can I go and build a big honking house and call it staff housing?
Yeah, so in this particular bylaw, in this particular application, we've actually kind of moved away from calling it staff housing, and we rely on the housing agreement to limit the use of the housing to people who are staff. So staff housing itself is really only permitted within, I believe, the C5 and C6, maybe the C7 zone as well. And those are essentially our resort and campground zones. So this, I don't believe that, kind of the term staff housing is really used in this zone as it currently exists. However, we're kind of, I guess, generally using the term staff housing here to talk about the provision of housing for staff and people that live within the District of Tofino. Again, these would just be houses and smaller sleeping units built on the subject property. However, the housing agreement would be what restricts the use of those to long-term rentals and for only people that work and live within the District of Tofino.
Yeah, I think we all get worried when we hear the term generally because we've been tripped up on that before. So it's certainly we want to see the housing agreement. I'm not going to oppose the first reading, but I think we're all want to be cautious. Councillor Quaid.
Can I ask at what point we would housing agreement?
Typically, we try to bring it forward at the second reading, would be kind of like the first time that it appears before council. Usually it takes 2 council meetings to adopt a housing agreement. You kind of first, second, and third reading, and then adoption at a subsequent meeting. So the idea would be to adopt the housing agreement prior to adopting the zoning to ensure that housing agreement is in place and that there's nothing weird happening. So typically we'd bring it forward usually at second or third reading, and then at the consideration of adoption of the zoning, we would also have consideration for adoption of the housing agreement, which we would just do first in the meeting prior to considering the zoning.
And just a small follow-up to that, if we can have consideration in the housing agreement in regards to rents to sleeping quarters that don't have a bathroom or a kitchen, I would think that those rents would be considerably small. Yeah. Thank you.
Just,
Did you have your hand up?
I had, sorry, I thought maybe. Just reading through this, I mean, it's pretty clear it's not just for staff of Tofino Botanical Gardens, it's for other, so it's really a rental.
Yeah, essentially.
They're rental units for basically anybody who lives and works in Tofino. That's okay. I honestly, this makes me really uncomfortable, this application. I mean, that besides it being for sale, we're already in a situation with the Tofino Botanical Gardens where we've had conflict over language in agreements that's not resolved. I mean, just because it's taken out of this application, that still remains unresolved that we have to deal with. And to add this in at a time when we know the applicant wants to sell the property, it seems to me it I just find this really uncomfortable and find some concern in this. Like, does the applicant want to do this, or is it just for the sale? Like, those things. And then if we're dealing with the the next owner, I'm just expressing my discomfort with this application in general, I think.
Your worship, and through to Councillor Law and the rest of council, if we have questions for staff, then we can happy to answer those. I think where Councillor Law is going is more sort of debate with the rest of council. So and I don't think that staff want to be weighing in on whether this is the right timing given other circumstances.
Yeah, but the clarification, so it is not just for staff of Botanical Gardens. This is for.
Yeah, that's correct. It would essentially be, in essence, similar to the THC development that we've been considering, in that it's designed to provide housing of a particular form for staff and people that are living and working here in Tofino.
That's great.
Perhaps if I can offer some perspective before, I don't have further questions of staff, but I can definitely say that if we, for myself, Councillor Law, if I just remember that this is in regards to a land use decision and solidifying things as our community sustainability manager or member has said, sorry, as Peter has said, that solidifying our goals in housing agreements, in being very conscious of the siting, etc., and removing considerations of who it is or previous, and we have to look directly at the land use and decide that this, and to recognize that this applicant is bringing forward a housing for the community, is interested in engaging in a housing agreement. These are the things that when as a councillor, I look at it as a land use decision, it perhaps removes a little bit of the discomfort for me. And regardless of who the applicant is or who it may sell to is not really my consideration as a councillor. My consideration is ensuring that whatever land use is decided upon is reinforced by the housing agreements, by proper discussion, by understanding of what that land use is and how that will carry forward for decades, not just for this applicant. And sometimes that relieves some of the discomfort for me, if that helps at all.
Thank you. I have two questions. One's just related to a possible future housing agreement. Is it the intention, if the units aren't used by staff, then they'll be rented out, or is the idea that is the initial intention solely for staff and solely to rent it out?
So I think the intention would never be to use any of these for short-term rentals of any sort, tourism accommodation of any sort. It would be strictly long-term rentals, 30 days plus, under housing agreement for, similar to kind of the THC agreement for people that are living and working here in Tofino. We may also be have to take into consideration the rental. So I'd say that there's no question there's a financial advantage to the applicant or whoever potentially owns the property by having this permission added to their zone. However, they're based on existing district policy and existing district goals. Providing housing is something that there is broad support for, as long as it is housing that is in the form that we desire, I suppose. So we're not looking for short-term rental housing. We're not looking for anything like that. It's housing for people that live here in the district, which is, I suppose, the kind of the basis of staff support for this application.
So would it be possible either through the housing agreement or the community amenity contribution to ask that one of the units be designated as affordable?
Yeah, certainly. Well, I think under the housing agreement, all of them would have a certain level of affordability. This would be, of course, the discussion with the applicant based on, that they may be unwilling to construct the units if the housing agreement is so restrictive that it doesn't allow them to ever really break even with the cost of construction. However, the housing agreement would be intending to limit the rental fees to what would be considered somewhat at least in line with the affordable housing needs assessment. So that would be kind of the goal, and that would be potentially part of the community amenity contribution. or all. This is, again, a discussion that have to happen with the applicant.
Okay, and then just the last comment, given the history of the Botanical Gardens and the Raincoast Education Society, I'd be very interested to see the environmental impact study for something on the mudflats. That's all.
I just wondered, was there any visuals that came with this, but they didn't come in the report?
No, he hasn't submitted any yet. This is something that I think maybe also of just worthwhile considering. It's not a form and character development permit area, so this stuff has to be considered at zoning amendment. My understanding is, it'll be quite, what's been proposed so far is essentially these, kind of for the sleeping units, 10 by 10 structures with not a shed roof, but a gabled roof, just sort of simple gabled roof. Probably board and batten siding, maybe cedar siding, with a small kind of deck out front, covered. That's kind of the sketches and the vision that I've been given from the applicant, but I will likely ask for more visuals to accompany second.
That's great.
Was there any flexibility shown by the applicant to lower the number of self-contained dwelling units or independent sleeping units and or their size?
This was kind of originally what has been asked for by the applicant. There's certainly, based on kind of discussion from council today, I'm more than happy to go back and kind of suggest that maybe slightly smaller, slightly less, maybe a little bit more easy to support.
Thank you.
Councillor Anderson.
Yeah, I'm just, you were asking for some comment on the long list of current uses under the current zoning that are available. So one of the things I've noticed under number 5 of the current uses allows for one restaurant, tea house, etc., and also one restaurant cafeteria. Is that, and they're both the same floor area size. So is that meant to be one restaurant period or one of each type of restaurant?
So
and how does that, which one is the current restaurant?
So
fall under the tea house definition or the restaurant cafeteria definition?
So this is, it's been mentioned a few times, but this particular zone was not very clearly drafted. So there's a few things like that have caused issues. Currently, my understanding is that the existing Darwin's Cafe fulfills the allocation of one restaurant. There's still the potential for a separate restaurant to exist. The difficulty here is that we actually have a definition for a cafe as well as for a restaurant, I believe, within the zoning bylaw. And a cafe is essentially a smaller restaurant with less seating. Whereas a restaurant is typically seating is allocated associated with the parking that's available on site. Tea house, to my knowledge, is not defined. However, we do have, again, the term restaurant there. So we would assume that it could be restaurant slash tea house means restaurant or tea house and or tea house, I suppose, or just or. So in this case, essentially 2 restaurants could exist on the property. Right now, 1 restaurant exists on the property.
I think that should be sort of pulled into the discussion just when we're considering density overall, some of these other uses that could be built out over time. So.
Anyone else?
I think Councillor Anderson has a great point. The idea that, building 5 houses and 10 sleeping units and keeping the existing possibilities that's a lot. I'd be against that.
Can I ask?
You can ask.
In that interest, when would be the appropriate, is this the appropriate time to start weeding out or defining this zoning? In the interest.
I would say that's at council's discretion.
Okay.
However, the one thing to note is that the applicant may or may not be in favor of that. And one of the things that we have to do with every application is consider it. And so we can kind of I guess, negotiate with the applicant and act as a sort of go-between between council and the applicant. However, at the end of the day, there may be things that the applicant desires and that they're not, and requests from council that they're not willing to entertain. In that case, the application may not be supportable moving forward. However, we still bring it back for consideration. But of course, everything that's been mentioned today are things that I will kind of feed back to the applicant and I guess further refine the application and the associated zoning bylaw to hopefully present something in second reading that is supportable. If the applicant is not willing to engage in some of these suggestions, it may be that the application is no longer supportable.
Thank you.
So one can't clean up the language in the zoning before we approve this.
There are ways that council can essentially clean up clean up is a particular way to describe it, but change zones if they so desire. However, that's a particular approach that may not be, I guess, pertinent to this particular application. I don't know, maybe Bob has something.
I mean, the zoning belongs to the municipality, and council may, at its discretion, initiate zoning amendments across the community, or more specifically, at any time it chooses. So if council wants to make changes in zoning here or anywhere else, that's something the council can certainly initiate. I think that Mr. Thick raises a good point that there's, with this application, there's something very specifically that's being applied for, and I think it's either, at this point, in my mind, we can go back to the applicant certainly and say, there's some discomfort with adding this to the other uses that are allowed there. Is there room to consider things differently? This property would still enjoy any uses that it does currently have. They would enjoy lawful non-conforming use status. But we can certainly canvass that, and if, again, at any point, council can change zoning for any zone. Process, of course, not change zoning.
Now, my concern is, I think we all know we have issues with the language in the zoning, and, if it's not properly gets solved, that problem still exists. We're just kicking the can down the road. So the question is, are we ever going to resolve this language in the zoning? Or are we just going to pass it on to somebody else? I know you'd like to do it once you've retired. We can have the discussion about, with the applicant about bringing it into this language, or we can initiate it ourselves. I think that there's I'd want to be careful about using. We've been looking for opportunities for employee housing across the board. We have someone who's come forward with an application to provide affordable housing. There's a bit of something that I find a little bit challenging to say, okay, well, since you're coming forward with that, we want to fix everything else at the same time as well. I think that there may be a way to do some of those things, at least clarify language. It may not be, oh, well, it's one restaurant, not two, or whatever, but it might be, let's be really clear about what some of these things mean, because this zone was not drafted by someone that normally drafts zoning laws, I don't think. That's great.
To that, I'd just like to remain thoughtful about exactly that. Somebody coming forward interested in the provision of housing and coming back to them with changes, and the event that may dissuade anyone else from coming forward with housing. I'd like to, address the application at hand and have, open and honest discussion. But if we are interested in changing zoning, taking that on as a council in another location or at another time and not tied to this application, I think is probably the best due process.
I mean, I would just, I would just support exactly that. We've been giving counsel before about looking at what's being in front of us. And in this case, as Councillor McQuaid and our CAO in the past have indicated, that what we're looking at with this particular application is a land use question. And personally, I find the value in providing the staff accommodation, permanent accommodation in an area that we're being challenged with, that we're all aware of, that I'm looking at it through that lens at this point, and with the ability, as Mr. Thick has pointed out, having housing agreements. I don't know when the opportunity would come to clarify that language, if this is the appropriate time. I don't feel for me it is, but I hear what you're saying about kicking it down the road at some point. But particular to this land use decision, I'm very supportive of moving ahead with the first reading, looking to see what is going to be coming up in those housing agreements related to the use of that land, and how we can protect some of those things that we've learned through experience that we need to be looking at.
Yeah, I'm not proposing that we use a zoning, trying to change the zoning before we give agreement, but I'm trying to get the zoning changes back on the burner, so it's not just, I'm all in favour of giving first reading, but let's not forget about this zoning language needs to be cleaned up, and let's try not to pass it on to the next council, because it's been hanging around for all the time I've been on council. So.
There's the sleeping cabins. There's a few. I didn't notice that they're on your map, but there are some sleeping cabins on the property. Are they already? And some tiny homes. Are those? Is that non-conforming? Or are they? Is that what we're looking at building? Is there a building or allowing?
There are, so there's an existing sort of old cabin on the property that's used often for staff accommodation. I believe there's also what's called the tent platform, which is sort of a structure that's used for staff accommodation. Often they have woofers there. I'm not sure if these are conforming with the zoning bylaw as it currently is written. And any other structures may or may not be conforming with the zoning bylaw as it currently is written. So this would be something that would allow a certain thing that, to my knowledge, has not been widely constructed on the property, and it would allow it in a certain place. But there may be other things on the property that have been built as sheds or outbuildings, and their use currently may not be in conformance with the zoning bylaw. However, I'm not exactly.
Thanks, Peter.
I'm happy to move if
Yeah,
they feel ready.
no more questions from anybody? Go ahead.
Great, then I will move that the District of Tofino zoning amendment bylaw number 1295/2020 be introduced and read a first time.
Second.
Those in favour? Unopposed? Motion carried. Opposed?
I'm opposed just to, yeah.
One opposition. I think we'll all be interested to see the housing agreement.
Take a 2-minute while we're Josie.
Are you going to tell Josie she can come
I
up?
think she texted her. I could hear her on the phone as well.
looking at us now.
I checked since.
Okay.
I should-
Counselor McQuaid, do you see the two dogs outside?
The two golden retrievers.
Yeah.
I did.
Okay, thanks everyone. Peter.
So I believe this is my last presentation for the morning. This is another zoning amendment consideration of first reading for 380 Main Street. So this is the foreshore area that's in front of the shore building. The application was received on May 12th of 2018. Permission to proceed was granted April 28th of this year. The location, as mentioned, is the foreshore lease. So this is where the marina currently exists, as well as the events building that's in front of the shore building. The proposal is a zoning amendment that will allow a reduction of the minimum required lot size. Basically, the purpose of this zoning amendment is to facilitate a subdivision of the existing foreshore lease. There's an area of the foreshore lease that's been filled, and the applicant would like to purchase that off of the province. They have an offer to purchase it. However, they do need to subdivide it off, so it is actually a fee simple lot, and it can be owned that way. The area that's approximately proposed to be purchased is in that sort of blue rectangle there. So it includes essentially the filled area directly in front of or kind of incorporating the existing walkway, as well as a certain portion of the existing kind of event center and little, I believe there's sort of kayak storage in that area as well. So a foreshore lease has to be associated with an upland parcel. It can't exist and be held independently. So currently this foreshore lease is associated with a unit that's in the shore building that the applicant owns. The applicant wants to separate these two things. And so in order to do that, he now needs to acquire a separate piece of property that's directly upland of the lease that the lease can then be tied to. So this new lot that he's hoping to create through subdivision purchased from the province would serve as the upland property, even though nothing would be constructed on it. It would essentially be a new lot created on a map, and that would be the sole purpose of this lot would be as a legal entity to tie the foreshore lease to. So again, quick look through some of the policy that we use to work through these applications. The Vision to Action Plan has some comments on downtown Tofino, which is quite close to where this particular zoning application is centralized located. Tofino's amenities infrastructure include safe, high-quality, pedestrian-friendly entry to downtown, allow for greater walking and biking throughout the community. So one of the central concerns that staff have regarding this application is kind of the continuity of public access to the water and pedestrian infrastructure in that area. We're also, as always, considering the environmental impacts of any development, so ecosystems and watersheds flourishing, biodiversity preserved, wilderness is protected. This area is actually not part of the OCP. The OCP ends at the waterline. However, should the proposal be successful and a new lot be created, this property will be within the village designation. Environmental considerations, public access objectives are important to consider with regards to this rezoning application. Staff don't anticipate that there will ever be any structures built on this particular lot, as it is currently just basically a pile of infilled rocks, as well as the existing structure that's there. However, ensuring legal public access to the water is strongly supported within both the Vision to Action and the OCP. The lease and the upland property are currently part of the Shore Comprehensive Development Zone, which was originally drafted to facilitate the shore development. The minimum lot size specified by the zone does not allow further subdivision of the property. So that's the area that needs to be changed in order to allow a subdivision of the foreshore lease. The province has advised the applicant that this zoning must be changed and must allow the subdivision prior to the sale of the infilled portion and the final completion of the applicant's goals. So we're looking at a text amendment essentially to the existing zone. We're just changing the minimum required lot size. An alternate approach would create a new zone, so a new comprehensive development zone specific to that particular piece of property. Staff feel that a text amendment is probably the easiest way to accomplish it, and don't have any concerns regarding this approach. Don't have any concerns regarding creating a new lot with this particular zone on it, as it would be very difficult to further subdivide either the foreshore lease or the upland property, and also very difficult to construct anything on this particular property. However, staff are recommending that we may consider a no-build covenant for this particular property, just to prevent any unwanted structure from potentially popping up on that particular parcel. So some of the land use considerations, access has been mentioned already within the official community plan as well as the multimodal transportation plan. This is quite an important thing to allow pedestrian continuity where possible, particularly with regards to the waterfront and the harbor area. To allow pedestrian access to the water is quite important. Currently, there is a right-of-way that the district holds through the property, as well as coming from the Tla-o-qui-aht wing and lane dock along that way. There is a small 1 meter wide section of this area though, however, that is not currently dedicated. So staff would ensure that that is dedicated and the public has continued access down to the marina there. We may also consider limitation of uses on the new parcel. This would be the no-build covenant that I mentioned. Wildlife and environmental considerations. Should the application proceed, we will be referring this to WildSafe BC, as well as any other interested parties, and ensuring that this proposed subdivision may not further impact kind of the marine terrestrial interface that exists in that area. Even though there has been significant human development in that area for decades now. Flooding and tsunami, again, not a major concern. There is flooding potential here, of course tsunami potential in this particular property. However, as there will be no habitable structures there, it's not a major concern for this particular application. And then the community amenity contribution. This is something that's been mentioned to the applicant. We haven't had an in-depth discussion yet. However, we will prior to second reading and at second reading have a bit more of something to present to council regarding that. So the options today would be to grant first reading to the zoning amendments, grant first reading as amended, reject or refuse the application, defer otherwise deal with the application. Staff are recommending first reading. And if there's any questions or look at next steps as well, we'll be going through the referrals process. This is an important process for this particular application. It's not a major land use change necessarily. However, there may be some things that other agencies are interested in seeing or have some comments about. Following that, we will solicit any additional information from the applicant, then bring it back for a second reading and move forward from there. So if anybody has any questions or comments, I'm happy to speak.
Okay, thanks, Peter. Councillor Anderson?
Yeah, in your report, the comments about public access, it wasn't clear to me if you're talking about vehicular access or pedestrian access or both.
At this point, we'd be considering mostly pedestrian access. The original shore development was intended to provide the development that has. However, there were some agreements already in place to ensure that there was public access down to the waterfront and actually into the marina. There's a right-of-way or an allowance there, a sublease, pardon me, is the actual term for it, that allows drop off of the public at the end of the dock, and then the public can actually come up the dock and then up through the central stairs of the shore building. And then there's also a statutory right-of-way that follows the water line towards the wing and lane dock. So we want to make sure that as this is no longer a lease and becoming a private parcel, that we ensure that we have those statutory right-of-ways that continue through this new parcel and allow that same unimpeded access.
Okay, satisfied with that. Thanks.
Anyone else?
I think he's answered everything in this report.
All right.
Sorry, yeah, I do have a question. So there was a mention of a text amendment plus a covenant that ensures that accessibility.
Prevent development.
So I think I did mention a no-build covenant, which would be to prevent any further, and then we would use kind of statutory right-of-ways to ensure that we have, I can't remember exactly how wide it is, but I believe it's a 3 meter wide path kind of through that property that continues to allow that pedestrian access down to.
Yeah, so in my experience, I've definitely seen gates or access points go up. So I would be in favor of a covenant with no build. I'd be in favor of a text amendment and covenant.
Yeah, I think that was staff's concern as well. The potential for blocking public access, even though we should technically have it.
Okay, great.
Guess I'll take my turn.
Sure.
The District of Tofino zoning amendment bylaw number 1296/2020 be introduced and read a first time.
Second.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Any final questions or comments? Okay, all in favor? Thank you. Motion carried. Thank you. So you mean now it's Aaron's turn, or are you doing the Middle Beach Lodge?
Oh, should we have my
Lodge housing agreement.
Big Middle Beach Lodge housing agreement, that little amendment,
Did I have
the third reading. I don't.
I think I do actually. Sorry, we're actually considering the adoption of this, and I apologize. I got ahead of myself.
That's okay. That's okay.
So this is a fairly short presentation. I thought I would include a brief presentation, even though we are looking at adoption. There was a slight change based on council's direction from the last time we looked at this. So I'll move through this one quite quickly. So this is another housing agreement bylaw for the Bella Pacifica Campground at 400 Mackenzie Beach Road. So there have been a development permit and a building permit issued for staff housing on the property. My understanding is that it has been constructed. Full DCCs have been paid, but by entering into this housing bylaw, the applicant will have a 50% refund in the DCCs that have been submitted. So the intent of this housing bylaw is to regulate who may rent the units in the development, but it does not specify maximum rents, which is fairly common with housing agreements associated with resorts. Our kind of approach historically with this has been that those people who run the resorts know how much they pay their staff, and if they want to keep their staff, they are somewhat required to not overcharge them on rent. However, moving forward, that may be an additional consideration for these types of housing agreements. So the development is intended to provide housing for staff of Bella Pacifica Campground and Middle Beach Lodge. So it's not a large-scale affordable housing project, but the housing agreement will ensure that the units are used by employed staff and their families, as was suggested by council at the last meeting, and cannot be used for any type of short-term rentals. So this bylaw gives the district the authority to enter into the housing agreement. The highlights include can only be used for staff of Middle Beach Lodge or Bella Pacifica Campground, and their immediate family cannot be used for short-term rental of any kind. So the amendments kind of include language to clarify that these units will be for staff of both Middle Beach Lodge and Bella Pacifica, and can include immediate family members as well. So the options would be to adopt the proposed bylaw as amended, amend further and adopt, reject or refuse the application, or otherwise deal with the application. Staff are currently recommending the first option. And if there's any questions or comments on that, happy to speak to them.
Doesn't look like it. Okay. Well,
I recommend that the District of Tofino Housing Agreement Bylaw number 1292/2020 be amended at third reading by changing item C in the background section of the agreement from, in accordance with District of Tofino Development Cost Charge Bylaw number 1124/2010, the transfer wishes to designate the staff cabins as rental housing for Middle Beach Lodge employees, on-site employee rental housing. 2, in accordance with District of Tofino Development Cost Charge Bylaw number 1124/2010, the transfer wishes to designate the staff cabins as rental housing for Bella Pacifica Campground and Middle Beach Lodge employees, their partners, and their immediate family members, on-site employee rental housing. And that District of Tofino Housing Agreement Bylaw number 1292/2020 be adopted as amended.
thank you. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. Motion carried. All right, now, Peter, you are done.
Thank you all for your patience.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Peter.
Good afternoon, or good morning, Mayor and Council. Today I'm going to be presenting the final draft of the Part C of the Official Community Plan. We are at step 4 in the OCP process, which is drafting the plan. Following this, we'll be pulling all the pieces together that we've looked at over the last year and a half and developing a draft plan. There's a bit of a background. I think we've all fairly familiar with it. The most recent activity that occurred was our consultation in early March, right before the pandemic hit. Again, another way to kind of look at step 4. This is a consultation process. We're going to revise parts A and B, which have been revised, introduce part C today and to the community tomorrow. And then again, as I said earlier, move on to step 5, which is actually drafting the OCP. Step 5, which will be the next, will be the subject of a next presentation in a month or 2 from now. We'll have the OCP come to council as a permission to proceed. That will also, following that, involve consultation, and then based on the feedback we receive from that, move it to first reading, and then the required financial waste reviews, and then public hearing, and then second, third, and final reading, hopefully. I'm just going to smooth this. I feel awkward staring at TV. I'm just going to look at you guys. The feedback from part B is included in the presentation or in the report that's in front of you today. We had a lot of great comments. The community seemed to be very engaged. A lot of the comments that we heard lined up with the comments we'd heard from the Part A consultations. They were a little bit more detailed as the subject matter was more detailed. And so we're pretty happy with that consistency. So Part C, the subject of the report today has 4 pieces and a 5th one that we need to talk about as well. So the first one we'll discuss today, all to present today, is amenities. So the amenity section is a section that exists currently. Its intent is to support existing district policy, so particularly our CAC guideline policy. It outlines our approach to amenities and outlines 2 approaches that we're both familiar with and we prefer to use. So that's the phase development agreements, or PDAs, which allows us to explicitly talk about amenities within rezonings, and then community amenity contributions, which is what we also use, which is what our policy is based on. There's a third option that we don't use at District of Tofino, and that's the amenity density bonusing process. And that's because it doesn't fit for small rural communities. It's a tool that works well in sort of dense urban environments where you're looking for height to trade off for density. Temporary use permits is section 9. It involves all the lounges in District of Tofino. It's very similar to what we have currently in the OCP. The one major change is that we've expanded the conditions that we can consider for permits. And so that now, as council considers a TUP for issuance, it can look to the multimodal transportation plan or the vision to action plan. So we've made that fairly overt within that section so that we can have those broader discussions about use. So it's not just I want to operate a hot dog stand. We might say, okay, that's great, hot dog stand's an interesting use for here, but we want to understand how that's going to affect our pedestrian traffic or something like that. So we've included that in this rewrite. In a similar way, we've also updated our development approval information area section. Again, it's district-wide. This DAIAs allow us to require information from applicants in relation to certain things such as the natural environment or servicing. This is something that's been in place for the last 8 years, and it's something that we've had to rely on probably 2 or 3 times in that time. So generally when we work with a developer, we'll ask for this information and they'll be very forthcoming with it. It's very simple. A developer wants to do something, we need more information about that property or about how it might impact our property. And so we ask for that information, and generally it's a pretty easy discussion and we get the information that we require. The DAIA actually gives us the teeth behind that. So we rarely have to trot out, we're going to make you do it, but it is there as the backbone to that section. We're expanding it for this version of the OCP to include transportation, parking, public facilities, and community services. So currently we only require it for a natural environment and servicing briefs. We're also proposing to move it from the land use and procedures bylaw to its own standalone bylaw, just for transparency, so we can a bylaw to point to rather than having to explain it, as a section of the land use and procedures bylaw. And it's in need of a rewrite anyway, so I think it's a good opportunity to take it from that bylaw and rewrite it. Monitoring. We have a monitoring section in the current OCP. It includes an action plan and indicators. The 2012 OCP monitoring section was a good first start, I'll say, but didn't really, hasn't really met our expectations. And so staff has been exploring expanding that section, the development of a new framework, tying that to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, developing indicators, data points that are tied to specific policies. And the idea is that as we move forward, and probably in 2 or 3 years, have it monitored and try to start tracking how we're doing on certain policies to make sure that we're meeting our targets, and if we're not, adjusting the OCP or the policies within the OCP to achieve the goals that we want. So in the OCP, in the 2020 version, it's going to outline that process. Staff are recommending that, as this is fairly administrative in nature, monitoring, reporting out, that we're going to move that framework outside the OCP. It also allows us to adjust where necessary, a lot easier than adjusting a whole OCP. And the idea is that we would look to council for considering funding for that on an annual or semi-annual basis through the budget process to ensure that it's happening. And the idea is that we are constantly improving our OCP, evolving with the community, and making decisions to support the wider community goals. Finally, development permits. This section currently resides within the official community plan. A part of it, if we move forward with this recommendation, will remain in the OCP, but the meat of the development permits will land in the zoning bylaw. Development permits allow a more detailed and nuanced consideration of a land use application. We can then consider items such as steep slope or effects on a riparian area through development permit process. And again, those are triggered at building and subdivision generally. So staff are proposing to move to the zoning bylaw for a number of reasons, and I outlined those in their report. In reading sort of the best practices book of BC planning, suggests that zoning bylaw is probably the better place for them. It's not done everywhere. It's one of those tools that they've lived in OCPs for so long that they just live in OCPs, and then having conversations with our consultants who will be working with on the completion of the OCP, they didn't even know that you could do that, let alone understand perhaps why. And so from my perspective, we have the OCP, which is a non-regulatory bylaw, sort of gives us policy direction for our community growth, for our land use and our development. And development permits have lived there, but we don't use them as non-regulatory tools. They're actually regulatory tools that we use on a day-to-day basis. And it's a little bit uncomfortable. There's always been a tension between having them in the OCP versus somewhere else. So we think that this will allow us to streamline development processes. It'll allow council to have more opportunity to have a broader discussion about development than we currently have. So for example, in the past, we've discussed a zoning application for something in the downtown core, and staff would probably over and over explain to council that we can only talk about use and density because it's zoning, and we say we'll move the development permit and guidelines to the next stage, which happens at building permit, which will be a year or two hence once the use is already granted. And it's not a really transparent process either for council, because it's a lot of time usually between these, or for the community, which doesn't understand that this permission was given 2 years ago, but now we've got a good building here that's permitted. So that's one easy example for me that I know would work for us, is that if we can have, similarly as we have in the multimodal transportation plan, if we can have a section that talks about development permits and form of character development permits, we can talk about that, line up the issuance with the zoning and take care of that at that stage. It also means the applicant knows exactly what they're getting when they're getting it, and for them the next stage, and it's not another permit process. but a building permit. And so this is something I think will actually help us. In speaking with our lawyers, we may also be able to use the zoning bylaw enforcement tools, the MTI and the bylaw notice tools, to add another enforcement option to our arsenal. So right now, if someone doesn't follow the development permit guidelines, we try to, because our only option is taking to provincial court, we generally work on a compliance-based model where we say, okay, you've taken down this 1,000-year-old tree, please plant 4 new ones to make up for that. And it's always after the fact, and because it's quite expensive and uncertain to go through the provincial court route, that we just don't. This, in moving into the zoning bylaw, may give us an opportunity to assign a fine for not meeting a guideline in development permit area, which again doesn't solve any issues, but at least gives us one more piece of enforcement to have a conversation with someone about. And finally, comprehensive development zones is something, a tool that the District of Tofino has used extensively over the last 10 years. This will just allow that tool to be a little bit more layered or detailed. And in terms of development permits, and this slide will become the basis for a future report to council if we move forward with this process. Council would expect to see a zoning bylaw amendment that would be taking the development permits and putting them into the zoning bylaw. So one sort of nuance here is that we will leave in the OCP the map and a description of what the development permit is covering in the OCP, and the guidelines, the exemptions, the security requirements will live in the zoning bylaw. So it will allow us to adjust those guidelines as the community evolves, as things change. It's a lot easier for the community council and staff to amend a zoning bylaw than it is an OCP. It's not necessarily less. We're not just because it takes less time, it doesn't mean we're not looking at it as deeply as we need to be. It's just that an OCP amendment only happens, in my experience in Tofino, about once every 10 years. And a zoning amendment, we can generally, is a year or two on average. So it's having a development permit there also allows us to adjust it as we go forward. We're suggesting, and it's in the council package, amending a number of the development permits. We're proposing 3 new development permits, a wildlife habitat area that covers almost the entirety of the District of Tofino. That would be an environmental development permit area. Renaming and adjusting slightly the tourism focus area around the Cox Bay area to the Cox Bay development permit based on the report that we received 2 years ago now. And then the inclusion of a steep slope development permit area that would be used exclusively for subdivisions, so not for building permits. In the report, we also mentioned a number of development permit areas that are under consideration, including tertiary dwellings, tsunami development permit areas, and others. That is a map of all of our environmental DPAs. So you see the riparian, the tourism focus, foreshore, mud flats, the new wildlife habitat areas, and sort of give a visual indication of what.
I'm on call. Sorry, guys. I'm actually sorry. To take this, I could be having to exit. Sorry.
You bet.
This gives a visual representation of the areas that would be under that new DPA, as well as the existing ones. So finally, the next steps would be undertaking a consultation with the community for Part C, which will launch tomorrow. Step 5 will be assembling the 3 parts into a bylaw and working with our consultants to do that. Introducing that bylaw to council at a committee of the whole meeting or a council meeting, similar as we do to permission to proceed for zoning, followed by further consultation with the community. And then once we're fairly certain we understand what that bylaw wants to be and we're not thinking we need to make many changes, we'll bring it forward to council for first reading If it gets first reading, it will be forwarded to the financial, to Nyla for review in consideration of the financial plan. And then following that, our process of public hearings, second, third, and final readings. I should also mention that in the process of drafting the final version, the Director of Finance and the Director of Engineering and Public Works will be intimately involved with that. So that, again, it won't be just dropped on in their laps. They'll have an opportunity to discuss and finalize that draft. And there you have it, the parts of the District Community Plan draft.
Thank you. So what would be most helpful for you in hearing back from council today? What, like, kind of what?
I would be happy for any comments.
Okay.
I'll take notes, thoughts, items that you'd like me to look at further. For me, following this step, I'll be working with our consultants to start bringing this all together, which involves copywriting, editing, inconsistencies, the whole gamut. And so any feedback I get now or, after this meeting as individuals, I'm happy to take. The consultation period should be about 3 weeks for the community.
And that starts tomorrow?
Starts tomorrow.
And that's entirely online?
That's entirely online.
Okay.
We've had fairly good feedback for our shipping containers, and I believe Elise had something for
April had the e-bike policy.
e-bike policy. We're having a lot of feedback, more than it's the first time we're doing it, but it's almost more than we get in person, and good well thought out comments. So I'm comfortable for this, personally, for this section to be mostly online. As we get into that full OCP, and people have a chance, I think we may have to think about something else. It's a lot of work. I think we all recognize from our open house for the Tofino Housing Corporation how much work it is for an open house, and with OCPs we tend to get, probably close to 100 people for something. I think we get together, and so the sort of logistics behind planning that are
right.
Consider. I feel like to do it once or twice.
Okay.
But anyways,
Okay, thanks. All right. Okay. Councilor Long.
First, Aaron, thanks a lot. There's a lot of work and I really appreciate it. Some great stuff in there. Just a couple things that jumped out at me. One was the map of the tourism focus DPAs. I noticed that the Chesterman Beach, the Howard Drive was included in tourism focus DPA, and the undeveloped or not yet developed portion of Mackenzie Beach was included in there. And I seem to remember from our meeting that we had discussed not including those in the tourism focus. So just refresh me, was that was that something that came out of the meetings or public input?
So the tourism focused development permit area has existed since the 2002 OCP, and so then, and in its fullness was the areas that are currently the ones you described in Mackenzie Beach, Howard Drive, and then the second kind of blob was the Cox Bay area. As part of this review of the OCP, and those will be largely unchanged. And through this OCP, we looked at Cox Bay particularly because we thought there may be some uniqueness about that area. We wanted to make sure we understood that a little bit better. So that's why we basically took the tourism focus DPA and turned it into Cox Bay DPA.
Gotcha. So Howard Drive was always tourism focus DPA? Always. Oh, I see that.
And for what we also did within the body of the OCP, so within Part B, is we renamed. So one of the issues was our OCP designations also designated that area as tourism focus, and our development permits designated as tourism focus. Two separate things, both named the same. So in our Part B, we've renamed that to Resort District or the beaches or whatever we're going to rename it, but it won't be tourism focus. That's the OCP designation, like the neighborhood. And then this development permit, which sort of sits on top of that as a layer, allows us to have a conversation about the environment and form and character of resort resorts in that area. So yes,
That makes sense.
that's what.
Explained it, yeah. Questions?
Anything else that you wanted? We'll just go around.
I had a small note. I can actually talk to you later. It's not a big deal. Or is that okay if I bring up stuff and
Yes, you've
send
got,
Aaron an email and say, look, on the line, it's 8 subsection 33 or something, there's this.
a specific little question.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay. I'll do that.
Thank you. I should also mention that generally in the past, we brought this forward to a committee of the whole meeting versus a council meeting. And so again, not looking, I know we would allow us to have a bit more conversation. Still happy to take the comments, just because of timing, brought it forward to a council meeting.
Great. Councillor Anderson?
Yes, it's a lot of work, and it's, reading through the report, it's very detailed. And honestly, I don't know if anything's been missed, really. Captures so much. So I'm in support of the additional development permit designations, and also I think it's supportable to move it to the zoning. So those were, I think that was the meatiest bits of it that I'd like to comment on. So that's right.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'd agree on the DPA. I just have one question on TUPs because it's always bugged me. I've never been in favour of this renewal period. I mean, I'd almost rather have a longer period of 4 years instead of 3, and then that's it. Because then we always get put in an uncomfortable situation, and I think it's unnecessary, especially if it's something that's popular in town, to actually say no to somebody. Like we're not giving. Whereas I think if you sent the message, we're giving you this length of time, and after that, that's it. I could say something that would be rude, but you know what I mean. Get on with it. So, does any other communities not have renewal periods? Or
It's a little bit awkward, and perhaps something that I could talk with the manager of corporate services about one day, but the legislation permits it. So it says it can be issued for up to 3 years, right? So it's our discussion 3 years, and that the applicant can apply for a second use of that. There are some municipalities that actually believe that it goes on indefinite, and I talked to out of the South Island who have a different interpretation of it, which says once you have the TP and they're running trailer parks, and that's what they've gone for 25 years.
Yeah.
Constantly renew TPs. I don't think that was the purpose. The TPs are brought in, if you look back at the legislation, for things like fairgrounds and things that were going to happen. We've expanded that use a lot in Tofino to allow people to try out businesses or get some affordable housing. So I think administratively, we'd have to look to what type of motions council would have to make on that first TUP to signal they may not consider a second TUP. And that's something I don't have enough information now that perhaps something we could discuss.
Well, there's a general principle that you can't find decision of a future council. So if this council were to decide you wanted to issue a temporary use permit for a 3-year period, there's no way that you could bind the council 3 years from now to only consider a one year temporary permit. In the case of an application that the last council considered, they issued the first temporary use permit to be of a duration so that they would see the renewal themselves. I guess if council wanted to be tricky and only wanted 1 3-year period, you could issue a temporary use permit for a month, and then it would come back in a month and you could issue the 3-year or something, or you could issue a year and then it would come back and you could consider the 3-year. But each consideration should be on the merits of the application rather than on council's view of, well, we only want, I'm not expressing this. It should be true consideration rather than, well, when this started out, I felt that it should only be 5 years total or something like that. There used to not be a renewal, and they used to be 2 years. Mr. Rogers is correct. It was fairs and like crushers for sand and gravel operations that were meant to be truly temporary, and they brought the application has certainly broadened over the years.
Yeah, 'cause in this town, I know they're incorrect, but I mean, I think everybody in this town thinks the renewal is automatic. I know it's council's decision.
Correct.
But, and I think that causes a lot of strife when if we do say it's not going to be 3 years or whatever. That's just my thought.
Thanks. Councillor Steer.
Thank you, Erin. Obviously appreciate the work, and small interruptions such as pandemics didn't seem to phase you at all. I really would like to support the intent of the addition to the DAIAs, those other criteria that you're including in there. Very supportive of that, and I'd even throw a few more in. But anyways, thank you for that. And once again, supporting the movement of those. And you've explained it better, and it was my question. Could you explain further the reallocation of the DPs in the zoning bylaws? Completely support that. It made sense. And there was, as I went through and I had some notes that I was curious about, and this was a general curiosity around when we initiate securities and we ask for security up front, it's technically almost as a deterrent. How do we determine the amounts? And if, in your experience, how effective are they? And are we making those kinds of, like you say, you can chop the 1,000-year-old tree down and then, okay, now plant your 4 other trees. Is there a way of strengthening that? I guess as a deterrent was one of the things that has come up in the read and in your presentation.
So yes, generally we take security. I think we need to be a little bit clearer in it, but generally we take it for environmental DPs only, and it's kind of a fallback. It's $1,000. So someone is putting in a new driveway or building a house, it's usually $1,000. I mean, obviously it comes with a plan that says they're not going to damage the environment, and we're usually fairly comfortable with that being so. In the past, for some of the larger developments, such as Pacific Sands, we held on to an almost $100,000 security. Again, this was post, sorry, we held $100,000, and it was based on the scale of that development and landscaping, the sensitivity of that area. It didn't help us when they cut down the tree. And so what I've been working on, sort of on the side here, is a risk matrix about how and when we determine costs. So it's kind of at this point at staff's discretion. If we look in the application, the environmental development permits, I think there's a possibility of a significant issue here. We're going to ask for 5,000 or 10,000. That's kind of where it's at right now. In extreme cases, we ask for the applicant to go get a quote about how much it's going to cost it's usually to do with landscaping, that's about remediation, and hold on to that. So I think that staff could apply a little bit more rigor in that and develop a little bit more of a process. That helps me with actually the work that I was sort of doing anyway. So I don't know if that answers your.
It does for sure. Yeah, I was just curious, and if there was room. First, I wanted to understand how they were applied, and then if there was room to strengthen or to make it so that the potentials are lessened. Let's say. I just thought of my own personal experience where there was a 50% retention of of vegetation on that mud flat end of things, and by the letter of the law, I could have clear cut 50% of it and left 50%. And is the intent, and I digress, of course, as I do. The DPAs themselves, very the newer ones that were created, very supportive, of course, with the intent of them. And there's a few small things like on the foreshore DPA, the extension. It was my own confusion, and I just wanted what is current setback, and I think it had 15 meters, and then you were going to increase it to 20 meters. Was that a combined total of up to 35 meters, or was that going to 20 meters? I know it's a small thing, but
Yeah, I think it's one of the ones that is unfortunately it's still under consideration about that. I think the intent was was to push it out to 30 meters. And so in my rating, I might have cut some numbers. The intent was to match it up with the WMA. I will make sure that when that report comes back to council as a zoning amendment, that that's finalized and detailed. But the intent is to match it up with the modified DPA.
That's what I thought, yeah. And then the wildlife habitat DPA, of course, super supportive of the new one. Is to develop the regulations to address protection of trees in the strip site. And it also indicated in there that, once again, we'll be maybe looking at that potentially an addition, or I don't know if that's the right word, but that maybe another layer is that significant tree bylaw that may be in conjunction with that, and that obviously probably would go hand in hand, and I suspect it does.
Yeah, I expect to be back in front of council probably early October, but late October, let's say October, with the memo about tree protection bylaw that would sort of fit hand in glove with this development permit area. I think that development permit area is going to require a serious consideration when it's brought forward as an amendment, because it would require anybody who does anything on the property of the District of Tofino outside of the areas that aren't in there, so Industrial Way, Park, Abraham, and the downtown, to get a development permit. And it would be for environmental reasons. And so that's a big impact to the community, but it also reflects probably what I hear the most from community members about the OCP so far is protection of the environment and preservation of the ecosystems, all that stuff. So this is one way to do that. It basically says we care about all of our lands, and we're gonna ask you to. This is how we're gonna ask you to think about it as well.
Yeah, and I suspect you've heard the community loud and clear in council. Loud and clear, that's great. And then there's just one last little thing. In the HWM plan, they have the wildlife, they refer to as dangerous wildlife, and I think that included in there was cougars and I don't know, wolves and bears. And I just wondered if we could add humans into that dangerous wildlife category.
Thanks, Councillor Steer.
Thanks, Mayor Osborne. Thanks, Erin. This is an immense amount of work. A lot of the feedback I feel like that we gathered prior to the start of the pandemic is actually the feedback we've received all during the pandemic. And when I was reading this, I felt like I just heard everything that I had heard for the last few months. Just so it's nice to see that we were on the right track previous and perhaps an even stronger track now. The community feedback that we have here speaks strongly to limits. In regards to housing, short-term rentals, commercial development. Can you speak a little to how this OCP reinforces that idea of limiting?
Yes. In terms of, there's I guess two answers. So I'll answer the part C first, and then I'll answer both part B. In the part C, what we're doing by adding development permit areas is it actually, what it does is, in essence, adds friction to the system. So it's a very clear message that development for development's sake or development area is no longer the name of the game. That when you develop, you need to consider it carefully because we're going to ask you to consider it carefully. And I think that's a pretty big message about overall development. In terms of actual limitations, in Part B, we talk about restricting further development, commercial accommodation, large water users, but have a little bit of room there for housing. And so I think it's 200 units over the next 5 years of housing is what our target is. And commercial retail tends not to affect our infrastructure that much and isn't located in areas that are redeveloped. So commercial retail would also be supported. And industrial land is kind of the one that I'm not quite sure about how we're going to deal with this, because we probably need more industrial lands, but to get more industrial lands, we need to cut down pristine forests. And so there's a pretty significant tension up in Industrial Way and about how we're going to manage that. So I think the OCP it will significantly limit some types of growth. It will permit other types of growth that what we want in terms of residential. I think that's the balance that we've struck, rather than the door being, if we adopt, so to speak, rather than the door being closed, the side doors open for residential stuff, and everybody else can wait outside the gate for the next 5 years. And to your first comment, it's funny, when I was reviewing this, I was trying to review it from a COVID lens, and I just kept coming back to everything that you just said, is that it's already there. It's just kind of ready to go, I think. I mean, it does need, definitely a little bit more detailed look about that, which is something our consultants are going to work with us on, but it lines up a lot with, as you said. Yeah.
Thank you. I just had one further question, if that's all right. I was just wondering, it does say that this was sent out for consultation and comment to Tla-o-qui-aht and Heshquith, and I was wondering if we've received feedback.
Yeah, so it was meant to be sent out yesterday. It'll get sent out this afternoon.
Okay.
I haven't received any feedback from the Part B items yet, and I'm hopeful of Part C. I think once this is together as a whole, and it's introduced to council's permission to proceed, we may have to strategize how we're going to try to ask for input from the local First Nations, because I haven't received a lot so far. Again, with COVID, it gets a little bit more difficult, but something I'm still struggling with.
Thanks for that.
Thanks, everyone. Okay, a few things. First of all, the development, I appreciate this discussion around development permit areas and the consequences of breaking the conditions of a development permit. And I think that's a really important thing for us to consider. And so when is the right time to give more kind of detailed feedback on development permit areas?
It will be through the amendment, the zoning bylaw amendment. So again, happy to hear anything now.
Yeah.
But generally, what I'm looking for today is the idea that we're going to move this from one bylaw to another. It's a good idea.
It is a good idea.
And then I can finish the OCP, and then while the OCP gets read into bylaw, we'll have the zoning bylaw amendment, the DIA bylaw, the land use procedures bylaw. They'll all come together so that it's adopted all together. And through that specific conversation, the zoning bylaw, I think. Okay.
Thanks. I'm going to make a couple of comments then around form and character and the development permit areas that address those. And I've been thinking about this for a little while, but just this past weekend, I spent 5 days in Victoria and on the Saanich Peninsula. And I swear to God, we went to every single municipality and drove past everything. And it really, and having grown up there on the Saanich Peninsula, I had that feeling of what has changed since I was a little kid. And one of the things that really struck me was the stark differences in building styles in residential neighborhoods and other places. And it got me to thinking about our Main Street DPA and downtown, and the fact that residential dwellings are exempt from the DPA. And so why is that? What is our history of exempting when we've got these beautiful character dwellings on Main Street? Why would we exempt those properties from the DP?
So I'm going to try to use my memory banks here, but basically for single family residential, we can't require people to build them a certain way. So form of character is for commercial multi-use families. So, as we get that there isn't a DP that allows you to deal with residential. Bob?
I think the legislation, sorry, I was just going to look it up.
Yeah.
It allows DP developer permits for, as Aaron was saying, industrial, commercial uses. And I think the word that's used is intensive residential.
Right.
Doesn't define intensive residential, but in looking at this, redoing an OCP some years ago, was hard to make the case that single family is intensive residential. In fact, it's the least intensive, so we thought we may be able to apply it to duplex, but yeah, for single family. To maybe jump ahead a little bit, if we wanted to protect those kinds of homes, I mean, a heritage designation is something that could be considered, but there's a lot of front end work to be done for heritage designation. It's not quite so simple as drawing a line on a map, but if that is something that, as a follow-up to the community plan council wants to have considered, then that's work that we could start to undertake.
Okay.
So one of the issues, as well as this, is when we had they weren't completely exempted. Was somebody wanted to change the front door, put a new window in, or fix their roof, and they have to come to the district for a development permit area that was empty. It was basically us taking an application fee, saying that bring in front of council and move forward. So it was, for that type of activity would add months and significant costs for someone who, literally wants to change their roof style. Heritage designation is something that's been talked about since the day I started here. We haven't really moved forward with it. There's always tensions. There's a tension between preserving smaller houses in your downtown core, which are built up, versus having someone do a land assembling and building you a 3-story apartment building for rental or commercial retail in an area that's built up. So again, there's a feel and a character, and there's also then pragmatic about where do we want to build these things. Do we want to build them in our forests or in areas that are built up? And so things like heritage designations and development permits, sort of work at cross purposes with other certain things like housing density sometimes.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. I was curious, and I'm not saying one is bad or the other, and I'm not really trying to assign a value to this, but just to point out just to understand better kind of where we can and cannot operate. But also it strikes me that even if we didn't have a heritage designation and say we lose one of those homes and it's bought and redeveloped into, we can end up with glass and metal and things that we feel don't express our coastal character, like our DP says, in a way that, just makes it a bit more disjointed if you're walking downtown on Main Street, for example. So yeah, and I'm thinking of Dorothy right now, but but the other thing that struck me when I was reading that and thinking about it this weekend and thinking about, growing up in a place and wanting it to retain the character that you had when you were a kid, or that, you take identity from that. The way our downtown looks is part of our Tofino identity, but it's our identity. It's a settler identity. And so it got me thinking about, if we are hearing from the public and we believe in principles around reconciliation, and we are looking to engage with First Nations and our OCP too, where do we begin to embed some design principles into these forming character DPs that also honor and allow for Indigenous architecture or Indigenous design? So I don't need an answer or anything like that, but it's just something that occurred to me, that are we cutting that out by not explicitly identifying it?
I love talking about formal character development permits with council. Favorite conversation.
I know you do.
I think it's what this process will do will make it easier for us to have that type of conversation, in the sense that we can adjust the Main Street DPA guidelines through the zoning bylaw.
Yeah.
If we decide that we want to go out, put an RFP out for a project to say exactly what you just said, and to consider other perspectives of form and character, and then rewrite them based off that, and that can get done in the zoning, and it can happen a fair amount quicker than it does with the OCP. So I can't answer about which process, but the process we're talking would make it easier to have that conversation.
Yeah.
If I may, I would also like to throw in my aesthetic is more Blade Runner. And so neon and rain is what I go for.
Okay, thanks for that. Yeah, I was reading, we use the term authentic and eclectic and all that, and I was like, yeah, whose authenticity is that? I really started to think about that. So the last thing, maybe the last two things I'll add is, one, the monitoring piece is really important to me. And I think this is a place where local governments always aim to succeed but fail. And we really need to set ourselves up better for this next 10-year period, and in a way that much better engages the community, I think, in helping us as a local government monitor our OCP and its intentions. And then ending with that, on public consultation, we can start this by doing a really good job, even in times of COVID, in the public consultation. And so I really appreciate what you said a few moments ago about, this Part C is online, but at some point in this process of really finalizing the OCP, we need a really great job of public consultation. And I just want to impart upon everyone who lives in Tofino and cares about Tofino that this is the document to come and have your say about and be a part of and take ownership of, because it is going to be the next 10 years that guides a lot of who we are and where we go. And that's so important. So I hope that we'll be able to be a bit creative in that, and we're going to have to obviously deal with COVID and all of that, but to be able to really reach out to those parts of the community that we are not always hearing from, and for those people for whom COVID presents some real obstacles, that we really go the extra mile to make sure that they get the opportunity to participate. Thank you. Okay, anything else? Any other feedback on where we're at with the OCP? Okay. All right, then might we have a motion to receive this report?
That the report titled Draft Official Community Plan Part C dated September 8th, 2020 be received for information.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Great. Thanks, Aaron.
Good job, Aaron.
Okay. The District of Tofino Debt Servicing Reserve Fund Bylaw 1291-2020 for adoption. Were there any questions that came up when you considered it? Okay.
There's a question? Or director Resolve?
Oh, sure. Go for it.
I'll move that the District of Tofino Debt Servicing Reserve Fund Bylaw number 1291-2020 be adopted.
Second.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. Carried. All right, the VIA Summit is coming up. It is being held virtually this year, and I think two things we need to discuss: who would like to attend and attend it virtually. And I think, Elise, you were curious if council would like to have the ability to do it here, like watch it on the screen, and we could do it together.
For the next two items, staff is looking for direction about how council would like to participate in these conferences, whether you'd like us to book this room and facilitate that for you to join here together, or if you would be joining individually.
All right, thanks. Okay, so let's start off with the VIA Summit.
And no interest.
Okay, that's okay, that's fair.
I'd love to go.
Okay,
Got a lot out of it last year.
you're good?
I'm happy not to go.
All right, maybe we say 3 then, because Britt is not here today, and I think she really enjoyed it last year.
And how would you like to participate?
Happy to do it here. Book the room.
Sure.
Okay. Okay, so maybe then a motion that up to 3 council members be authorized to attend the 2020 Vancouver Island Economic Alliance State of the Island Economic Summit to be held virtually from October 27th to the 29th, 2020. I'll move that. Seconded. Okay, all in favor? Thank you. Motion carried.
And you guys typically, if I remember correctly, report back and tell us all the highlights.
Absolutely.
I'm interested post-COVID. I think it'll be, or during COVID, it'll be an interesting one, not post-COVID. I'm sorry.
This declaration of COVID.
Mid-COVID.
Okay, and then on UBCM, what are your,
All virtual event.
it's all virtual.
That's the one to go on.
Me too.
Yes.
I didn't hear that. I didn't hear Councilor McMaster.
I'd like to
I'd like to
attend.
Oh, you just wanted him to say it.
Confused.
If people want to do it here, I kind of would like to.
I'd love to. I think it would be a great experience.
Excuse me. Okay, in that case, in here, and then that up to 7 council members be authorized to attend the 2020 UBCM convention to be held virtually from September 22nd to 24th, 2020.
Second.
Thank you.
I do have a question. Does this, I understand that we're registering as individual council members, but ostensibly other people could be in the room and attend? Like, will our staff be here? Like that feels important to me. I don't know.
I don't know how it works this year.
Prince George brought half of their district staff with them
Right.
last year.
I think we would have to register as participants if we were going to attend as well. Certainly they're counting on the revenue from.
I did get a phone call.
Yeah.
Nervousness, yes.
Yeah.
I had not planned on attending the conference.
Oh.
Generally, when the conference happens, I I attend the ministerial meetings and not much else. And since those are separated in time and space, if there are particular sessions that council would feel would be a benefit to have some staff attend, then we could see about registering some staff.
Okay, cool.
And maybe I should, so I can be in the room.
Sorry.
Anyway, don't need,
You would do it separately anyways, yeah. Okay, that's okay. All right, okay, so that's a motion on the floor. All in favor? Thank you, motion carried.
We bring our own lunch or do we take it voting?
And we'll sort that out. Because food is important. We'll sort that
It's
out.
a long day to sit there.
It is indeed. Speaking of, okay, there is no unfinished business. Is there anybody signed up on the question period?
No, there are.
Andrew Bailey is the only person watching that is not from our staff, so, okay. No questions from Andrew, he can find us later. All right, then, if we could have, well, I'll just move that the meeting be closed to the public pursuant to sections 91A, C, E, and I of the Community Charter to discuss matters relating to personal information about an individual who holds or is being considered for a position as an officer, employee, or agent, employee relations, acquisition, disposition, or expropriation of land or improvements, and the receipt of advice that is subject to a solicitor-client privilege. Seconded. Thank you. All in favor? Thank you. Motion carried. Take a moment.
Thank you.
Did you want Aaron and Brent to be able to be here?
How come we never got, well, you've got to print the copy.
Because I printed my own out.
Usually puts them out.
I know. I'm going to ask her to start doing that again because it's way easier to follow along the paper agenda than have your
I have to scroll.
thing. I know. It's a pain in the butt. In my humble opinion.
A few minutes with some other things.
Yeah, right.
Agenda, don't have paper.
It's audio still on.
It's usually puts paper copy in the agenda.
Oh, right.
Yeah, just for you. I kicked everyone else out.
Oh, that's sure, because I wasn't coming at the.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I'll kick you out then. It's just Aaron.
So that's it.
Oh, right.